This listening session for the 2019 Northwestern Energy Electricity Supply Resource Plan is now in session. I am Chairman Brad Johnson. I also represent the 5th PSC District, which includes Helena. For the record, it is December the 9th, 2019 at 1:30 p.m., and we are in the Bollinger Room of the offices of the Montana Public Service Commission in Helena, Montana. If you have not already signed up on the sign-in list out there by the door, I would encourage you to do that. That creates another opportunity for us to keep you folks informed with regard to proceedings that will be coming before the Commission. On August the 20th, 2019, Northwestern Energy filed its 2019 Electricity Supply Resource Procurement Plan with the Commission. Pursuant to Montana Code Annotated 69-8.4, 419 through 420, and Montana Administrative Rule 38.5.8201 through 8229. I want to point out that the Commission has in fact extended the public comment deadline to January the 3rd, 2020. Following the comment period, the Commission will take Northwestern's 2019 plan under consideration and will then issue written comments in compliance with MCA 69-8-420. At this time, I want to ask Chief Legal Counsel Justin Kraske to summarize for you all the statutory role of the Commission in this proceeding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, public here. Under 69-8-420, the public utilities shall develop electricity supply resource procurement plans. The plans must be submitted to the Commission at intervals determined in rules adopted by the Commission. An electricity supply resource procurement plan must demonstrate the public utilities' achievement of the objectives provided in 69-8-419 and compliance with Commission rules. The Commission shall review the electricity supply resource procurement plan, provide an opportunity for the public to comment on the plan. That's the purpose of the listening session today. The commissioners are here to listen to the public. Commissioners and staff will not be answering any questions. We'll be listening to the public here today. The Commission shall issue written comments within 9 months after the plan is submitted to the Commission. And those comments must identify any concerns of the Commission regarding the public utilities' compliance with Commission rules and ways to remedy any concerns. The Commission does not approve the plan, it only comments on the Northwestern plan. The Commission is required to hold meetings in the area of the state encompassed by the plan. This is the first meeting today at 1:30. We'll be accommodating public this evening again at 5 p.m. in this room, and we've also scheduled additional listening sessions in areas across the state impacted by Northwestern's plan. First, Missoula at the library on December 17th in the evening, then in Billings on January 2nd at the Billings Public Library Community Room at 6 p.m., and then additionally on January 3rd at 5 p.m. at the Lewistown Public Library. Those are the listening sessions scheduled at this point. I will turn it back over to the chairman, and like I mentioned, just as a reminder, number one, the Commission does not approve the plan, and we're here today to listen to comments from the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kraske. At this time, I want to invite representatives from Northwestern Energy to present a brief summary of the 2019 plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is this on? Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Ben Fitch-Fleischman. I'm the Manager of Energy Supply Planning at Northwestern Energy, and I want to give a bit of a summary and some context for the environment in which this plan has been produced and the future that we're looking at from, there's a sign in the back that says, Northwestern, we are watching you. Caught my eye. I'm watching you too. So could you, Nick's going to help me with the slides. Next slide, please. So just by way of getting started, I want to thank everyone for being here, especially the public, but also especially the commissioners. This is obviously very important and deserves a lot of contemplation and a lot of attention. So I really mean that. Thank you for being here. This is a map of our resources just to give some context of where we are across Montana. I think there are two crises that are intersecting here today. I know you all are all well aware of the concerns about climate change, and that's what motivates a lot of you to be here today. I don't know if you're quite as well aware of the regional power supply crisis that we're facing right now, and I'm going to talk more about that because I suspect the other crisis will get some more attention from the rest of you in this room, but it's by no means to elevate one over the other. I just want to provide context. So this is the 2019 plan. We provided a plan in 2017 as well, and I want to put these together in context. This plan has a greater consideration of regional markets and how we fit in the Pacific Northwest and with our neighbors, and that's obviously an important part of this picture. What's changed since then? Well, the plan finds similar results as it did in 2017, and some people look at that and say, what's going on? Nothing's changed since 2017. A few things have changed, and essentially what's changed is that other people are looking at the region, and they're reaching the same conclusions that Northwestern's plan reached previously. All right, and that's very important, and I'll talk about those details in a second. Next slide, please. So first, as Mr. Kraske just pointed out, the commission doesn't approve or deny a plan. They simply issue comments on it. This is an informational process, and this plan is an informational document. I apologize if the text is a little too small, but essentially what this slide is just pointing out is that we took a comprehensive look at a bunch of ways we might meet our current and future needs. We considered a wide range of future conditions, resource types, and resource combinations that might potentially meet our needs. This plan is based on current estimates, forecasts, and assumptions, and we can always find room to disagree about assumptions and forecasts. So we've done our best to take a reasonable approach at the forecasts and assumptions, and we've done a Monte Carlo simulation over and over and over again to get many different potential future simulations, because we can't focus on just single events. That's one coin flip. We have to focus on a statistical assessment of probabilities, and that requires many, many, many iterations. This plan uses proxy resource characteristics and costs. We hired an engineering firm to tell us how much it costs to build a wind farm, how much it costs to build a battery, et cetera, and we use those costs. Those are assumptions. They're not site-specific. They very well may change as the world changes. But that's where we went to get a good start to those cost estimates of how much it costs to build different types of resources. I really want to emphasize that this plan does not select a preferred resource type, and it does not estimate location-specific infrastructure costs. So we heard plenty, you read in the newspaper that there's gas infrastructure costs out that aren't being considered. Why is Northwestern hiding it? We're not hiding it. We don't know what site-specific characteristics are for many of these resources, and that's true for a wind resource just as it's true for a gas resource, right? You have to have pipelines to bring gas, you have to have transmission lines to bring wind, you have to have land leases, site permitting, sage-grouse habitat, all that stuff. So these are proxy resource characteristics that we're putting in to run a big, complicated analysis about. And I want to emphasize that. So essentially, the summary is we've combined a bunch of information. We've done some pretty advanced statistical analysis that includes stochastic simulations that preserve historical correlations between weather, prices, loads, et cetera. And we've used optimization methodologies to select resources as example ways that we could meet our needs going into the future. So we took a bunch of information, we produced a bunch of information. The key result here is that we are short on capacity today, and the region is increasingly short on capacity. And since we rely on the market, that's a big concern for us. So I want to get into a few of the details, and Nick, if you could go to the next slide. So the orange bar across the bottom shows our existing capacity to meet peak loads. And so this shows, and no resource counts at 100%. It counts at essentially a statistical assessment of what its probability of being available is when you need to call on it. So for something like a Colstrip or Dave Gates, a gas-fired facility, then those tend to be in the neighborhood of high 80s to 90% because historically that's what they've been available. For wind, it's much lower because historically that's what's been available. And so it's all based on historical data, and we assign probabilities based on what is going to be available when. We add it all up, and right now we're right around 755 megawatts. And that's for a peak load that approaches 1,200 megawatts. And if you add a reserve margin on it, which is common in the industry, uncommon in Montana because we're so short, but in the industry you typically plan to have a little bit more than you need, That takes the need up to about 1,400 megawatts today. Now, there's been a lot of criticism of the plan and statements that it doesn't consider what would happen if the expected retirement date of Colstrip was much earlier or much later than whatever the big range could be. If Colstrip retired at some point, what you would see is that this orange bar on the bottom would fall. Whenever that date would, we would lose a chunk of the capacity that we would have. But the problem is relatively similar. It's just a bigger problem, right? We have a gap to fill. And right now we fill that gap largely by relying on the market and when our wind blows. If our wind is blowing, we got a lot more. We're getting a lot closer to meeting our peak load. And if it's not, we have to go to the market and buy it. And if Colstrip retires early, it makes that gap bigger. That's what it does. Okay? On the next slide, please, Nick. I've said a lot of this. This lays out exactly what we take a lot of the information. It's a lot of historical price, weather, load information, historical generation from hydro, wind, and solar, price forecast for electricity, coal, gas. We look at the basis differential for gas and electricity, which means what does it cost to have gas delivered in one point and then you have to transmit it to our system. Same from electricity. We can buy electricity at the Mid-Columbia hub, which is where Oregon and Washington kind of coalesce. Then we have to pay transmission to get it here, so we look at those. We have the resource costs I mentioned. I put two up there just to flag. The resource cost we have in our plan for a 4-hour battery is about $1,660 per kilowatt installed. That comes from the engineering firm. For comparison, a RICE, which is a reciprocating internal combustion engine, sometimes known as a peaking plant, costs about $1,800 per kW. There are other ways in which the costs and the probabilities that they're going to be available vary, and those are important, and the plan takes that into account. One example is that batteries today are typically only cost effective in the 4 to 6 hour range. That's not very long when you get a big cold front coming through Montana. On the other hand, you don't have to get gas to it, you have to buy power, right? So you're facing a different volatile stream of prices than you would for a gas resource. This is just to show you a glimpse of what's in the plan. We do hourly level simulations 100 times for every scenario we run. So that's 100 potential future paths each hour going out 20 years. It's a lot of hours, 8,760 hours times 20 years times 100 simulations, and we do that for every portfolio. So it's a statistically very rigorous assessment, okay? I don't want to get too bogged down in the details, but if you want it, this is what's in the plan is a summary of those results. And so what our plan finds is it typically selects, when we do the optimization model and say we've got these scenarios, what resources are selected to meet our needs, it typically selects a natural gas-fired peaking unit, and that's based on these costs and these assumptions. But it doesn't always do that, and remember we're doing hundreds of simulations and we have to take averages. Sometimes it picks batteries and we give it different scenarios. We consider a scenario where natural gas prices are much higher than expected. Right? We consider a scenario with a carbon price. We consider a scenario with a high carbon price. And we produce the portfolio that appears optimal according to the statistical simulation in those scenarios. The result is that we have, I think it's 12 or 15 different portfolios or scenarios that we select a resource mix for. And then we estimate the total cost. What's the net present value of that total cost to produce energy using that portfolio? And it ranges from about $5.7 billion to $6.2 billion. Before your eyes light up with dollar signs, that includes the cost of existing resources in that mix. That's total portfolio, what the model selects to build on top of what exists today. So it's in the neighborhood of $6 billion, and it's about plus or minus $500 million. These are big numbers. I recognize that. Next slide, please. So actually, just pause for a moment before I talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market. Let's just think for a second. Does that conclusion that the plan selects natural gas as the most cost-effective way to meet our resource needs in the future, does that pass the smell test? Is that crazy? And I'll submit to you that it's not crazy, and let me tell you why. I'm going to give you some evidence from other people. Not evidence that I've assessed, but evidence from other people. And the first one I'm going to point to is a study by an organization called Energy and Environmental Economics. These are folks who do work for a wide range of people. They're based in San Francisco. They're a consultancy. They have found the same thing for our region, that our regional supply is inadequate, and not only that the cheapest way to meet future needs is with natural gas, but the cheapest way to reduce carbon emissions and meet future resource needs is with more natural gas than we have today. This is not, I'm the messenger. I didn't do this study. All right, this is a study that Energy and Environmental Economics did, and I'd like to read you a quote real quickly about them. So this is Ralph Kavanaugh of the Natural Resource Defense Council. Stakeholders of all stripes rely on E3's rigorous, unbiased analysis to inform public policy decisions. So I see a lot of you shaking your heads at me right now and saying this is a crazy plan. I just want to submit to you that we're not the only ones finding these results. E3 is finding it. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council, which is a quasi-governmental agency, is finding similar results. Bonneville Power Administration is also finding similar results. Now go back, if you think back to that slide where I showed you that batteries and gas are close in costs right now, right? They are close going forward. But what the studies are showing is that gas is cheaper than batteries to do that right now. And so if you're shaking your heads, I'm assuming that the reason you're shaking your heads is because you've done advanced rigorous statistical analysis to come up with similar conclusions. So just a few points about the market. This is the history of prices. The point of showing you this, it goes from 2010 to 2019. You can see what's happening to the volatility of the market. Okay, next slide, please. This is a graphic from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council that shows expected resource retirements in the future. So there's some resource additions in the near term, that's the bars going up, and then resource retirements in the bottom. You can see Colstrip 1 and 2 retiring in 2019. There's Jim Bridger 1 and 2, which I'm going to call attention to in a moment, but they were originally scheduled to retire in 2028. If you add all that up, it's about 3,500 megawatts coming offline by 2025 and 5,000 megawatts total coming offline by 2032 in the region. Next slide, if you don't mind, Nick. So let me back off from the market for a second and just make sure we all have a handle on what Northwestern's portfolio looks like today. So on the left, you have our hydro capacity, 485 megawatts. In green, wind, 378 megawatts. Black is coal, 309 megawatts, 222 of that is Colstrip. The extra is contracts we have with qualifying facilities. And then our gas capacity, 202 megawatts. Now next to each of those, it has a lower bar, and that shows you that our probabilistic assessment of what that's likely to be available in terms of its capacity to plan for going forward. And so hydro is less, it has seasonal variation. Wind is significantly less because it doesn't always blow. Coal is slightly less and gas is slightly less. Now this doesn't show expected wind, which we anticipate coming on the system soon. Nick, would you mind showing the next slide? So we have about 239 megawatts of additional wind coming online.
Then there's about 30 people out here. We can't see what you're talking about and we can't hear you. So just so you know, I mean, the idea is to make this presentation to help us comment. We can't do that because we can't see or hear it out here. If you can help us with that, that'd be great.
Can we slide the tables up and get some more people in the back? Sure. Can we also push in a little bit more?
Pick up your table and move it. Flip it forward, 2 feet forward. Yeah, have we squeezed in what additional folks we can? Okay, hopefully that helps some. Wish we could expand the room. Dr. Fish-Fleischman, go ahead.
Thank you, and I'm happy to talk about these things after the fact with slides in the hall. If folks can't hear, I apologize. So I'm showing Northwestern's resource portfolio right now, and the point I was just making is that we have about 240 megawatts of wind anticipated to come online in the near future. That's 80 megawatts from the South Peak facility that's under construction right now, likely to come online in January, and then another 160 megawatts of resources that have contracts with us that appear to be moving forward to construction. One point that I want to make out here is that I've seen some criticism that we didn't consider in the plan a battery paired with renewables. We have a lot of wind on our system. If you add a battery, it's immediately paired with all that wind on our system. There's not some sort of magic that's not happening by putting them together and putting them in the model together. We already have extra wind. You put a battery in there, that wind can charge the battery, it can shift it over time, et cetera. Next slide, please. So there's a question in the break about solar. So this is a comparison of Northwestern's portfolio with a few neighbors, and I picked these neighbors to show you because these are ones that I've seen people in the headlines point to as saying, look at these utilities who are doing great with their commitments to carbon-free energy. So first off, Northwestern's in red, the other three utilities in the other colors. We have more hydro as a percentage of our portfolio than everyone but Idaho Power. I mean, on this graph, others obviously might be more heavy. We're heavier on the wind, we have less coal, and we have less gas. So if you want to compare us to our neighbors, I think you can be proud. I honestly do. We have a relatively clean resource mix compared to our solar, compared to our neighbors. We're short on solar. And it's true that we don't have a lot in Montana. It's partly because we don't have a great solar resource compared to our wind here, and that it's just solar's been lagging behind wind and development. I'll show you some. Next slide, please, real quick. This is a summary of our carbon-free generation as a total of our installed generation in comparison with our neighbors. Again, I think you can be proud of Montana's resource mix. I'm moving a little quickly just because I know this is public comment. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Next slide, please. This shows where we stand compared to our neighbors in terms of our market exposure. The blue bar shows what each utility has in terms of the resources under its control, either owned or long-term contracts. The orange shows, utility owned is in blue, the orange shows contracts, and the gray shows how much we rely on the market. And the point is to show you that compared to our neighbors, we rely very heavily on the market. All of our neighboring utilities are much closer to resource adequate than we are. So as the market goes, so goes Northwestern to a much larger degree than the rest of the utilities. We have a gap to fill, and I know that many folks are advocating to fill it with wind, solar, or batteries, and we have competing claims about whether wind and solar are reliable or not. You guys can make up your own mind based on the data. I want to show you a few shapes about what wind and solar look like on our system. Next graph, please. On the top in red is our load, daily load. You can see it kind of, there's a dual peak, breakfast and dinner. That's a common load shape. On the bottom is solar. Now, I was just explaining we don't have much solar. To even get it to show on the graph, I had to scale it up by 10. Okay, so this is Northwestern solar magnified by 10 to show you the shape. On the right, you have August, summer days. The gray line shows its capacity. Solar approaches its peak capacity in the middle of the day. On the left, you have the winter. That's February. That was our February cold snap. The solar did not show up during that cold snap. It's too bad that it didn't. Sometimes it does. This is to highlight the importance of a statistical, probabilistic analysis of how these resources might come together and meet our load. Another thing to note during that February cold snap is there was a 4-day period where our load never fell below 800 megawatts. Remember, we have 750 megawatts of capacity. That means our load was at least 50 megawatts greater than our resources could produce throughout that period. It's difficult to charge a battery in those situations. You can rely on the market. That's what we did, right? That's what we do currently. Next slide, please. Here's our wind, same 7-day period, wind in green on the bottom. The gray bar shows you what wind would be producing if it was at its maximum. Wind is very variable, all right? You can see the shape on the bottom. There's not much correlation between wind and load. Unlike solar that peaks in the middle of the day when loads tend to be higher, wind is more or less random in terms of its correlation with our load. Now, a common response to a graph like this is, well, you build more turbines and you're going to fill that out. So I went to pull Bonneville Powers Administration data. They have a much bigger footprint and a lot more wind. Next slide, please, Nick. This is Bonneville's wind. I added a couple months. So this is the first week of February, June, August, and December. The point is wind is variable. Renewable resources are not constant. They are variable, and there's no denying that, right? Now, the question is, can batteries smooth that, right? And that's a question of battery technology and battery cost, and that's exactly what we do when we model batteries in the plan, okay? So I went to pull, this is Bonneville Power's wind in February, June, August, and December of 2018. I went to pull the wind this morning from a weekly industry newsletter to see what Bonneville's wind was last week, and I got distracted by a different headline, and honestly, it distracted me to the point that I never actually pulled the graphic together. I'd like to read you this headline. Council study. This is a reference to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. 1 in 4 chance of blackouts in Northwest by 2026. PacifiCorp's October announcement that it wants to retire the Jim Bridger 1 coal plant in 2023, 5 years earlier than previously planned, pushed the likelihood of a major blackout in the Northwest in 2026 from 17% to 26%, or more than a 1 in 4 chance, according to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. The equivalent percentage for 2024 is 12.5%. So I know that if you're concerned about climate change, you don't want to hear that gas is the cheapest way to provide energy into the future, and that utilities are just that we're fear-mongering about blackouts. But these are studies done by reliable organizations. These aren't folks in bed with utilities. These are people that have a lot of experience studying these issues in the region. And I'm not trying to dismiss at all concerns about getting to a cleaner energy future, all right? But we can't ignore the things that we're seeing right now in the market and in the region. And this plan, just to wrap it up, this plan, next slide if you don't mind, this plan takes a comprehensive look based on best guesses about what we know about prices today and forecasts of the future, and produces a summary report about different ways to meet those needs. I think I've hit all of these points. I do want to emphasize that the studies I'm pointing to, like the one by E3, these are studies this is the Natural Resource Defense Council passing their assessment on E3, okay? So I think with that, I'll just, next step, final slide, just point out that our next steps are that we have released this informational document. You're going to provide comment on it. The commission will provide comment on it. No decisions are made as a result of this plan. Decisions will be made in a competitive solicitation where we release to the market a request for bidders to come forth with their technologies, including actual prices and actual information. The process will include close monitoring by the Public Service Commission, the Montana Consumer Council, and independent third-party observers, and that's where decisions get made. I apologize for taking probably more time than I should have, but I wanted to get it out, and I thank you very much, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Fitch-Fleischman. Now we will go to comment from the public. Let me ask that those of you who want to speak kind of form a line in this center aisle. We'll try and move you through. When you're done, if you could just move up the outside aisle, we'd appreciate it. Identify yourselves, if you will, your name and where you're from. And we do have Lisa Lasovsky, court reporter, recording these proceedings, so please speak clearly and slowly. If you get in too much of a hurry, she has a problem recording that. With that, welcome.
Okay. I think I got it. Thank you, Chair Johnson and other commissioners, for this opportunity to comment on this plan. First, I want to honor your commitment to serve the public. Very important. I mean, our life is powered by our power, you know. You all have supercomputers in your pockets right now, you know, with batteries connected to them that have to be recharged. So I know this is a big deal, and I take it very seriously. I got to say that I'm pretty shocked as a ratepayer from what I read in Northwestern's procurement plan. I was amazed that this is looking out 20 years and yet has no new planned solar or wind power. And I thought to myself, out of all of the public service commissions or all the utilities throughout the United States, this must be the only one that, considering our current situation, is looking ahead 20 years and says, we don't need any new solar or wind facilities other than what we've already planned for. That's just like like what, you know, what century are these folks living in if they think we don't need to increase this? Everywhere in the world, China, through the roof with new solar and wind every single month, you know? So if we want to be competitive, and I'm talking as a ratepayer, you know, South Wind, it's $20 per megawatt hour out of that wind facility. And Name? Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Koopman. I'm Jonathan Matthews. I'm from Helena. I'm not a professional. I'm just a citizen who cares about these things very much. So what I was going to say is that, do you need my address? You don't need that, do you? No, okay. So I just shocked that there's no new solar and wind. And the presentation from Northwestern Energy, he really provided the evidence that we are incredibly inadequate in solar generation. I mean, they're hardly making a blip in the solar map. And, we're east of the divide here. We have marvelous sunny days, We could have a lot of solar east of the divide. One thing that wasn't mentioned was there are federal federal tax credits that go along with pairing batteries right at the site of the solar generation or the wind generation that are not separated battery facilities, and those can be used to reduce the cost of solar and wind even more. So as a ratepayer, I'm concerned when Colstrip power costs $74 a kilowatt hour, and that figure came to us because Northwestern bought their 30% share in Colstrip 4 as an investment, not as part of their rate base. And then 2 years later came to the then commission, not you guys, and said, hey, we got this thing assessed at over $400 million. So can we please bring it into the rate base at over $400 million? And the commission at the time said, sure. So we ratepayers are paying as if Northwestern Energy had to pay $400 million for Colstrip 4, for their share of Colstrip 4. As a ratepayer, I'm very terrified that Northwestern owns 30% of Colstrip 4. The other 70% is owned by 4 coastal Pacific Coast power companies. They own 70%. And what are they telling us? 2 of them say, we're out of here by 2025. We're not going to buy any more power from Colstrip by 2025. One more, by 2027, we're not going to buy any power from Colstrip. Who's going to be left holding the bag? It's us, the ratepayers of Montana. We're going to be by ourselves. The last one, the last of those 4, 2030 is when they say they're out of here. And Northwestern's telling us they want us to be by ourselves, the Montana ratepayers, be the sole buyer of power from Colstrip 4 till 2042? Oh my gosh, I'm thinking this is going to be as crazy a financial situation as when Montana Power told us they wanted to become a internet company, I mean, this is like a boondoggle waiting to happen. So I want to see bump up that solar, which they just proved to us is incredibly inadequate, pair the batteries at the site of the generating facilities for that federal tax credit, pull out of Colstrip 4 when everybody else is, so we're not stuck holding the bag, and pair infrastructure of lines. Oh, we're not even going to talk about the new gas pipelines that would be required to do the new gas power plants that they're talking about here. So it's the simplest solution, the most cost-effective solution is to use solar and wind along with batteries, and if there's enough of them out there, the wind doesn't blow the same every place, and the sun shines differently in different places. The problem is they're way under capacity to make this work, and going forward, especially looking 20 years ahead, where the seas will be rising on the coast and when we'll be losing our ski resorts and all sorts of other crazy stuff, we need to have a forward-looking plan, not a backward-looking plan that's trying for more carbon, rather than making it work, because it has to work. Solar and wind have to work for us. Paired with batteries, with enough of them, with enough power transmission, it can work. And we want a plan that shows that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So welcome to your constituents. I know you're usually in the room with Northwestern Energy. You get to talk to them. Please make sure that you're awake during this hearing and just keep those eyes open so you can hear what we have to say, because this is really important. It's going to affect all of us down the line in the future. So Ben gave us a good... my name's Daniel Carlino, and I'm actually running for Bob Lake's seat. There could be someone in that seat right now that is going to stand up for us, but there's not. So something that Ben didn't show us in his plan, he didn't show the slide about the carbon emissions. Guess what? 20 years down the road, our emissions are going to be the same from Northwestern Energy unless you three that are here do something about it. Do you realize what's at stake? 200 species are going extinct. That's 10,000 every single day. That's 10,000 times faster than the extinction rate before the Industrial Revolution. You need to hear this, Roger Koopman. You have been a climate denier, and you're just writing while I'm talking about climate change. You are the people that get to affect what we're gonna do in our state with this. You need to wake up. This plan. This plan, it addresses the cost to the consumers, which you just passed a 6.5 million increase secretly. It also addresses the cost to Northwestern Energy. It does not address the cost to the environment. It does not address the cost to the air that we're breathing and our public health. It's time to address those things in this plan, and you need to stand up for us. Northwestern Energy is a for-profit company, of course, so good thing we have a PSC to regulate this for-profit company. When are you going to start doing that? We need you to step up and change this plan before it's too late. We cannot have fracked gas in Montana. This is something that's going to be seen down the road, and you guys will go down in history. How do you want to go down in history? The people that let them frack in our state, let them continue on with the climate crisis? Or are you going to be the people that stood up for your constituents, stood up for these people that showed up here today that elected you into this office? It's your time to step up and do what's right. We're tired of special interests and corporate interests making our policy decisions. The American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity helped write 3 letters from different states, from different PSC members, one from you, Brad Johnson, and you used the American Coalition for Clean Coal's exact wording for your letter to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You are serving the coal industry. You clearly have had lobbyists in your ears, and we're not going to stand for that anymore. The public is watching you. The public is watching all of you, and you better make the right decision. So the choice is clear. Are you going to allow Northwestern Energy to do their plan? Or are you going to serve your constituents and say no to this plan, no to fracking, and actually stand up for renewable energy in our state? It's in your hands now. You better make the right decision for us.
Hi, my name is Nick Shepard, and I, like a handful of other folks here, I'm part of the Sunrise Movement. We're a nationwide youth-led movement fighting to stop climate change and create millions of good-paying jobs in the process. And I'm going to be very brief today. I want to thank those of you that decided to show up for your job, and I know sometimes it's pretty hard staying awake listening to your constituents. But the pledge, it says, I pledge not to take contributions over $200 from oil, gas, and coal industry executives, lobbyists, or PACs, and instead prioritize the health of our families, climate, and democracy over fossil fuel industry profits. And really the pledge, it just makes it so we can trust you. We trust politicians that can sign this pledge. We know when they make a decision, though it may not be the decision that climate activists agree with, we can say, okay, it wasn't because they're bought out by the fossil fuel industry. It was because they just made a stupid decision, and we can go after them for that, but not because they're bought out. And a lot of you, I know you're limited by terms, but you may end up running for something else. This is a binding pledge. We've had politicians all across the state and country, I think about 1,800 nationwide, sign on, and it helps us trust them. So if you want us to trust you, I have 5 copies right here. Wish all of you had showed up so I could hand them out, but if you want to sign, I'll be here. Thank you. I can submit them, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ron Matlich. I'm from Bozeman. I've been a financial advisor, senior vice president with D.A. Davidson for the past 27 years. I want to thank you commissioners for holding this public forum. 3 points I want to cover: climate change, economics, and transparency. First, on climate change, Northwest Energy's 2019 resource procurement plan is blatantly disregards the science of climate change. Climate scientists have warned us that we are at a critical point in time regarding the use of fossil fuels. Northwest Energy's plan excluded cleaner, renewable sources of energy, such as wind and solar and battery technology. Montana needs to transition away from old technologies like the internal combustion engine, which has been around for more than 120 years, and the burning of coal and fossil fuels. For full disclosure, I put solar panels on my house. I drive an electric car, and the technology is fantastic. It works great. Montana needs to embrace the new technologies of solar, wind, and battery technology. Economics. I've been around long enough to have had clients who own Montana Power. It was a damn good investment. Something happened. There was a path of folly where we no longer have Montana Power. During the time that Montana Power was in existence, ratepayers in Montana enjoyed some of the lowest utility rates in the country. Today, we're still doing pretty well. I think we're ranked 38th in that top quartile for low-cost utilities, and I challenge the Public Service Commission to keep us in that top quartile for low costs. We demand a cost-benefit analysis on how solar, wind, and battery technologies compare in price to Northwest Energy's new gas-fired power plants. And I would emphasize jobs, 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 jobs. These technologies will create jobs in the state. No denying it. Finally, transparency. Northwest Energy should include the full cost of continued reliance on Colstrip power, namely Colstrip Unit Number 4, which I think we're looking out to 2024. Northwest Energy should disclose the cost of gas pipelines for its planned new gas-fired power plants. In summary, our energy future as ratepayers and our environment depends on full disclosure and transparency. The best decisions are always made this way. Commissioners, please insist that Northwest Energy is transparent in the process. Thank you.
My name is Steve MacArthur, and I'm a resident of Missoula, Montana. I'm an independent management consultant, and I appreciate Ben's use of statistics because I spent most of my career working with a quality management firm, Tennessee Associates International, around a global issue around statistical probability. The problem with statistics and the problem with math in general, it is looking at past data. And the problem we have today is that we need to be future-oriented, not looking in the rearview mirror for our future. And one of the things that our capitalist democratic process does not allow is to monetize and externalize basically the cost of environmental degradation. We all know that things are changing. And in any 20-year plan that does not include solar, wind, or battery storage is being led, you're being led by a blind man who is stumbling in the dark, because the future is going to be much more oriented toward new technology and the efficiencies of our ability to live in this planet in a more sustainable way. We know we're burning it up. The house is on fire, and unless you, as our elected officials, provide the guidance that government agencies have to provide for the free market enterprise to function properly, our society and this world will be destroyed. Your responsibility is one that is heavy and it is important. It is not one that we can shirk. And unless you stand up and demand that we include the externalized cost of the degradation to our environment, to the cost included in the healthcare costs that will go up as a result of bad air, polluted water, and the loss of income that will come from the degradation of agricultural interests, as well as the loss of possible businesses that will say Montana does not have the capacity to provide the energy that we need to run our businesses effectively. And that energy is going to be clean energy. It is not going to be coal. It is not going to be natural gas because of methane and its impact on the environment. It's 82% more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon is. And unless we come back with these issues and acknowledge the fact that we are on the wrong path and we better radically transform our economy and our society, we're going to be left in the dust of history. Thank you.
Morning. My name is Wilbur Raymond. I live here in Helena. And 3 years ago, my wife and I installed rooftop solar on our house. And since that time, we've watched our power generation with the software provided on a daily basis. And we've had numbers that don't look at all like the Northwestern slide in comparing solar with their demands. We've met our electricity needs with our solar on our house for the last 3 years. And if we can do it, in investing our own money, not taxpayer money, our money, and taking all the risks, seems like we ought to be able to ask our power company to do the same thing, to take that time and invest money in solar. We haven't combined it with battery storage yet. That's our next step as the battery price comes down, and we'd like to see the same thing happen with Northwestern's procurement. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Sharon Griffin from Great Falls. Gentlemen, thank you for allowing this period of comment. Such an opportunity as this is one of the bricks upon which our democracy is built. I'll not present expert testimony because I'm not an expert. I don't think you are either, as I understand it. But you do have a team of experts that advise you. They're your staff. Like the very capable and dedicated staffs of various agencies at the national level, your staff will present you with the facts if you listen. In my comments, I will be making 2 points leading to my conclusion. I hadn't realized that you have no power in this plan that we're discussing. That concerns me greatly. It seems to me that the only power you may have resides in your December 26th vote on the rate plan. I hope that vote isn't set in stone, and I hope that you're considering what you hear today. It's very disappointing to see that 2 of your members could not show up. At $100,000 a year, it would seem to me that you would come to these kinds of hearings. I am concerned because I don't believe your board, you, have the confidence of the people in Montana. And I don't believe that Northwestern Energy has the confidence of the people in Montana. That, unfortunately, makes it very difficult to believe what you say or to believe a presentation like we just saw. My first point of concern is the lack of ability to depend on you to tell the truth. I'm concerned with facts. I use the word facts intentionally because I do believe in facts. The Alice in Wonderland world created by so-called alternative facts is a dangerous delusion. Global warming is a reality, and it is aided by human action. I won't waste your time with all of the facts supporting that fact, nor will I list all of the country's organizations and reputable individuals who confirm that fact. But I will insist, as a generation in charge, the generation in charge of our world right now, at this pivotal time, our generation is responsible for dealing with global warming, and we will be held accountable for the way in which we deal. Point B, under point 1, the facts presented by you, Mr. Johnson, regarding the PSC's October 30th Northwest Energy rate increase 5-0 to 1 vote are disputed by one of your members, leading me to wonder what I can believe from you, Mr. Johnson. I apologize. I am not defaming your character. I am sure you are a person of integrity. But the omission of the acceptance of the Northwest Energy rate increase 2 days after a poorly publicized meeting, the weak explanation for that omission, the fact that there was no opportunity for discussion prior to the vote by the Commission, and the attempt to hide that fact. All this leads me to conclude that we were presented with alternative facts by you. That makes me very sad. The facts surrounding the mind-boggling attempt of Northwest Energy, several legislators, and this commission on a 3-1 vote are clearly an indictment of those involved. The legislation was a sleight of hand attempt to allow one Northwest Energy blank check bill to die, only to reintroduce a very similar bill by a different legislature under a different bill number. That was really disheartening to watch. Fortunately, we had a bipartisan group of legislators who voted that bill down. The fact that you voted 5-0 to deny Northwest's attack on solar energy, at least for the time being, due to insufficient factual information, is encouraging, and I thank you. I hope your action, your denial, is more than just a ploy to wait us out and sneak through an approval. Also, your incredulity with regard to Northwest Energy claim that Colstrip will continue to run through 2040, and your concern about who will pay for the Colstrip cleanup is heartening, and I thank you for that. So that is point 1. Point 2, my second point, is linked to my first point. The reliability of the facts provided by Northwest Energy and the Commission concerns on the balance of fossil and clean energy fuel in Northwest Energy's 20-year plan. Partner corporations in our area are moving away from fossil fuel. That's been clearly discussed. Talon closing its coal-stirred power plants, Idaho replacing their coal plants with electricity, a huge solar farm at record low prices, and committing to move beyond fossil fuel by 2045. Wyoming Utility and Colstrip Kona Pacific Core submitting a large long-range plan that determined that the most affordable choice for its customers was earlier retirement of several aging coal plants and replacing them with mostly wind, solar, and energy storage solutions like batteries and pumped hydro. These things are going on right now in our backyard. Northwest Energy claims that meeting its customers' needs with clean energy would cost $523 million more than the fossil fuel. How could the economics of clean energy compared to fossil fuel be so different from Montana and Idaho and Wyoming? In your response to the draft version of the Northwest Energy 20-year plan, you asked a very good question, and I appreciate it. You asked Northwestern to show their math on why buying more coal-stirred power would be in the interest of the customers. Unfortunately, their final plan ignores this request, leaving the public and state regulators stuck down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole with no flashlight. In conclusion, finally, thank you for your rapt attention. I imagine that I was going to say 5 of you, but there's only 3 of you would consider yourselves to be fiscal conservatives who want to limit the taxes that Montanans have to pay. I am asserting that your rate increase, possible solar rate changes, and the costs involved in the 20-year plan are taxes that you as a government body are leveling on your constituents. Your mandate is to maintain a balance between a fiscally healthy corporation and fiscally healthy constituents. Northwest Energy is a healthy combination. Its CEO makes over $3 million a year compared to our governor, who makes $110,000+ a year. That in itself is indicative of a system way out of balance. Your duty is to demand facts, use facts to make decisions, and make decisions that protect your constituents from an out-of-state corporation that dissimulates, manipulates, and threatens in order to increase its own power, with no concern for Montanans now or in the future. Corporations are not people. Money should not equal power, not in a democracy. It is your duty to reject this plan in its totality and to demand a plan that is based in facts and an overriding concern for our environment and our humanity.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Will Swearingen, and I live in Bozeman. Thank you for this opportunity to to comment on Northwestern Energy's resource plan, and thank you for your vote a couple of weeks ago on the net metering. Now, I have many concerns with the resource plan that I plan to address in written comments, but I'll mention just one major concern today: the large financial risk to ratepayers from the heavy focus on gas-fired generating plants. I believe this is a risky investment for 2 reasons. First, in the not distant future, gas generation, in my opinion, is no longer going to be economically competitive. We've already seen how, over the last decade, coal has gone from being almost 45% of the nation's electricity to a predicted 23% next year. Similarly, I believe that the rapidly declining costs of renewable energy are now eclipsing gas-fired electricity. According to one authoritative study, in only 7 years, by 2026, it will actually be less expensive to build and operate new renewable energy plants with storage than to continue to operate existing gas-fired plants. Existing would be the ones that Northwestern Energy wants to build. Secondly, it's highly likely that over the next decade, West Coast and other states in our region will gradually refuse to purchase electricity from gas-fired plants, just as they've already done with coal-fired electricity because of changing customer demand. So together, these two factors threaten to make Northwest Energy's new gas-fired plants a stranded asset within the next 10 years. However, given that these plants will last from 30 to 50 years, ratepayers will be on the hook to pay for these plants for decades to come. And this risk is becoming widely recognized nationwide. Some of you may know that in Indiana recently, utility regulators there unanimously rejected 850 megawatt natural gas plant because of concern that it would become a stranded asset. So in short, this resource plan is a risky proposition. The PSC should not allow the utility to pass on all these risks to ratepayers. I suspect that if Northwestern Energy had to assume any of these risks, they'd come up with a very different plan.
Mr. Chair, members of the board or the commission, thank you for being here today. I know it's going to be a long one, and I appreciate your sitting through this. Ann Hedges with the Montana Environmental Information Center. And I have a couple things to say. I'm going to make it brief. First off, the PSC does have power here. I think last resource plan, there were a couple of us who testified. The room was mainly empty seats. And a lot has happened since then, but the resource plan hasn't changed. My complaints about it are exactly the same as they were 3 years ago. And this commission did a very good job last time of going through and identifying all the flaws in the previous plan. That plan is the building block for future decisions for this commission, for Northwestern, and for the public. This plan is important. Despite Northwestern saying that you have no authority here, you do have authority. You have the authority to represent the public and make sure all the risks are properly analyzed, the costs are properly analyzed. What we have here today is a for-profit plan. It is the highest profit plan that Northwestern could come up with instead of a least cost plan for consumers. That is the problem. I do believe that your staff, in its most recent memo on the rate case, did a very good job of going through the risks associated with Colstrip. I think that their analysis of how much money remains for consumers to pay off, over $300 million at 8.25% rate of return for 20 plus more years, and yet your staff identifies that all of the other owners want out. They are looking to get out in the next decade. So what does that leave for all of us who are Northwestern Energy customers? It's called intergenerational equity. We are going to end up having to pay for something, and so are our kids, that they're not using because the other owners aren't going to be there. Northwestern cannot operate that Colstrip plant with only a 30% share in one single unit. They'd be irresponsible for them to go forward, and buying more is going to be expensive. And let's talk about some of those expenses that Northwestern ignored. The funny thing is, and I urge you to go look at Northwestern's SEC reports, Northwestern actually does tell the Security and Exchange Commission, because by law it has to, what the risks are of Colstrip and moving forward. It did not say that in this plan. It ignored that in this plan. It didn't want the public to know, but I urge you to go look at their most recent quarterly report to the SEC. And some of the things that you'll find in that quarterly report is an admission that in this new coal contract that was just signed that we don't have any details about, that contract is going to be is going to cost more money. We are going to have to pay more. We know right now we're paying $23+ million a year for fuel at that plant. We know that price since 2012 has increased by 35%. We've heard rumors that this new coal contract is going to increase prices another 30%. These are the questions that they should be disclosing. These are the questions I would urge the commission to request. Northwestern also told the SEC that when units 1 and 2 close at the beginning of next year, the operating costs for unit 3 and 4 are going to increase as well. That's not in this plan anywhere, despite Northwestern knowing when it submitted this plan that unit 1 and 2 were going to close at the end of this year. Talon, in fact, blames the closure for Unit 1 and 2 on the escalating price of fuel. It said it in its press release. It blamed it on the fuel costs, not environmental regulations. The escalating cost of fuel is why Talon is getting out of Unit 1 and 2. Those same market-driven economics are impacting the market economics of Unit 3 and 4. Colstrip's annual fixed costs have been increasing by 6.9% between the years 2013 and 2017. Those fixed costs aren't going to go away. In fact, what we've learned recently, for funny reasons, we've learned that there is a serious problem at the Colstrip Unit 4 boiler. Again, this time it's the superheater, and it's going to need next year a $20 million investment to fix that problem. That's what the utilities out in Washington State are telling their utility commission, but we haven't seen any of that from Northwestern Energy. They are hiding the ball about the cost of Colstrip. They hide behind the theory that reliability is the most important thing that there is, but yet they ignore the fact that in 2009, Colstrip was down for 6 months. 2013, Colstrip was down for over 6 months. 2018, Colstrip was down because it was in violation of the mercury and air toxic standard for 2.5 months. And now they've come to the commission asking you to pay for us to pay for the replacement power for that outage. Colstrip also has where do we hear about the ash ponds leaking? There are 2 sentences in this plan on the leaking ash pond costs. Those costs are known. The DEQ, to a certain degree, the DEQ told the Legislative Federal Relations Committee and Energy Committee in the House earlier this year that they expected the cost to clean up the Colstrip ash ponds was going to be $400 to $700 million. That's a lot of money, and it's not even mentioned in this plan. You know that DEQ now has about $150 million in bonding and is considering bonding for the coal ash ponds at Unit 3 and 4. As DEQ says, the biggest, most complex ash ponds at the Colstrip plant. And right now, Talon's plan is to leave waste remaining above the standards, the level of cleanup that they desire in the year 2120. That site, under Talon's current plan that DEQ is currently considering, will still have slow-moving pollutants existing above the point of compliance by 2120. So Talon's saying that cleanup plan that is wholly inadequate will cost about $110 million. Where is that money? Or the fact that DEQ will hopefully reject that idea and make them clean up those ash ponds properly long before 2120. Where are those costs in this resource plan? They're not there. Northwestern has failed in its duty to provide all of us with adequate information about the escalating costs of Colstrip. They put all of us at risk, and your job, please take this job and do what you did last time and tell them, go back to the drawing board. Don't present us with a plan like this again. We're not going to make any resource decisions based upon this inadequate plan because they forgot to include all the numbers. Thank you.
My name is Don Harris. I'm from Helena. I appreciate the commissioners being here, the ones that are here. I'd like to know how many Northwestern Energy officials are here. There's 2. Well, who should be sitting up there is them. You do have some power, but where are they? This is a shameful plan. That presentation I know statistics, and I've been down this road. That was a sham. That was cherry-picked information. That was bullshit. I'm sorry, but I just call it as it is. 20 years. Where's your imagination? 20 years. Solar's going to get cheaper. Wind's going to get cheaper. Batteries are going to get cheaper. Why did they just talk about batteries? What about the Martinsdale project? Water storage. It's reliable. It is cost effective. It's the right way to go. They have no imagination. This is a sham. They should be ashamed of themselves for presenting a plan that is absolutely the lowest level. The other thing, I'm one of the gray hairs here. You know, this isn't my world anymore, so I want to thank the young people who are here. This is their project. Alternative energy works in different states. It works in different countries. It's reliable. It's cost effective. And it's the future. I'm sorry. We're not running our trains on coal anymore. We're not heating our homes on coal anymore. Factories aren't run on coal anymore. Embrace the future. Come on, Northwestern. This is an opportunity to shine, to say we can do better. We can show the rest of the world, of the country, that we can do better. Their statement of lack of energy in Montana, well, we know why. They export over 50% of the energy they produce. We are the boilermaker for other states. Some of those slides, they're absolutely cherry-picked. I don't even see the representative, Mr. Fleischman, here, so. Well, I hope he's here and I hope he's listening. And I hope they appreciate the fact that people want to hear from them. They should have more meetings, they should have more input, and they should allow room for people to speak. I don't know if there's one person here that supports their plan. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Mark Judeman. I live in Helena, although much of the time you can find me working at our family ranch near Craig. Both locations are within Northwestern Energy's service area. After graduation from Montana State University in Bozeman with a degree in earth science and geophysics, I worked for Shell Oil for more than 30 years as an exploration and production geophysicist. During that time, I worked on many projects onshore and offshore, including being the lead geophysicist on several major oil and gas developments in the deepwater Gulf of Mexico. Following my retirement, I was on the adjunct faculty for the Department of Petroleum Engineering at the University of Houston, where I taught Introduction to Petroleum Engineering to class sizes ranging up to 400 students. So it is with some familiarity with oil and gas production that I share these 2 points. The first point is the decline curve for a fracked oil or gas well in the Bakken Formation of the Williston Basin. That is, the profile of production for an individual well peaks very early and is very steep. Production is highest when the well is first brought online, then declines rapidly so that in 3 years the well may be producing just a quarter or less of what it was initially producing. The only way to keep production high for a field is to drill more wells very quickly. The second point is the best wells in a field are in regions called sweet spots, where the target formation is thicker and richer. In those sweet spots, initial production will be higher and decline perhaps less rapid. The problem is that the sweet spots are limited in extent and they are exploited first. That makes it increasingly difficult to keep production up, even with more drilling. If Northwestern Energy is anticipating that gas from the Williston is going to be both easily available and cheap, they are likely badly mistaken. All fields eventually play out, and the Williston is no exception. It will almost certainly be producing a fraction of what it is now by the end of the 20-year planning period you are contemplating. Unfortunately, as that happens, and fuel prices rise, it will be the ratepayers who feel the pinch. We'll still be paying for obsolete facilities and pipeline infrastructure. We'll be paying for the high cost of fuel. Not Northwestern, us. The only way to avoid the increasing cost of fuels is to shift to clean energy, which has no fuel cost. Sunlight and wind are free, and the technologies that capture that energy are declining in cost, in stark contrast to fossil-fueled facilities. Storage cost, whether they are batteries or pumped hydro, and I also found it interesting that that was not discussed, are declining as well, so the red herring of intermittency can be dismissed. I urge the Public Service Commission to reject the procurement plan submitted by Northwestern Energy and instead require a plan that is both financially and environmentally sustainable for ratepayers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here, Commissioners. I do appreciate it. My name's Phil Knight from Bozeman, and I was at the Sunrise Movement rally in Bozeman this winter in the pouring rain. About 1,200 of us showed up out there. Absolutely miserable weather. And the one thing I remember best from there was a young man, not even man yet, 8 years old, saying, by the time he's old enough to vote, it's going to be too late. Think about that for a second. That's true perhaps of some of your children or grandchildren. The young folks right now are looking at climate change. It's staring them down as a crisis of existential proportions. And for Northwestern Energy to rely on dirty fuels as opposed to renewable fuels is criminal, and it is an affront to the future of this nation, this state, and our children and grandchildren. Whatever you believe about climate change, I know what I believe, and I know it's based on science, and it is extreme, and it is real. Have any of you read the Montana Climate Assessment that came out in 2017? Roger, did you read that? Are you familiar with the Montana Climate Assessment? Mr. Koopman? Okay, you can't answer.
I believe we're supposed to have any colloquy.
No worries. No worries. But I want you to think about that. We're looking at potential for 5 to 6 degree warming in Montana by 2050. 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit. What is that going to do to our agriculture? What's that going to do to our water supplies? What's that going to do to our forests, to our infrastructure, to our human health, to our air quality? Anyone that's planning on what sort of energy we're going to rely on to power our future must look at the hidden costs of dirty fuels. Those dirty fuels should stay in the ground. Fracking is an extremely expensive and potentially destructive process. Lots of folks in areas that have seen heavy fracking, their tap water is toxic. You can light it on fire. This is not something to take lightly. So right now, the United Nations meeting on climate change is happening in Madrid. 500,000 people in the streets of Madrid. And this is the youth that are leading this movement. 500,000 people marching in Madrid because of their fear over the future of our climate. I want you to please take those things seriously and take those things into account as you decide what sort of energy we should be relying on here in Montana. Thank you very much.
My name is Becky Piskey. I live in Helena. This is the third time I've been here in the past several weeks. We all know why I was here before. My husband and I have had solar in 2 different homes in 2 different states. I think it was the 90s. So I listened to Ben's talk. I listened closely and watched. And at the end, so encourage rooftop solar. Encourage some decentralization of power. We're under capacity. Encourage rooftop solar now. Don't net meter us. Encourage it. We could all work on this together. That's all I have to say.
Good afternoon. Thank you, commissioners and staff. My name is Patty Ames, and generations of my family were born and raised in eastern Montana, and my family members were dairy farmers. I have a lot of close connections to the land, and I care about our clean water and clean air, clean soil. I care about our environment. I wanted to start out my presentation by, I want to provide each of you a copy of this detailed article from November 7th, 2019, written by a longtime environmental energy journalist, David Roberts. And in this, he describes in great detail how Colorado has made the decision to move to entirely 100% renewable energy by 2040. And he goes into great detail. And one of the ways they came to this conclusion is that they contracted with a company called Vibrant Clean Energy that did modeling. We all know and understand that Northwest Energy has their proprietary model. And one of the things that happens when they do their modeling about what energy will be the most cost effective, it always turns out that their model recommends energy sources that will increase their profit and their shareholders' profit. So I wanted to point this article out. It goes into great detail about how they came to these conclusions, how it will be far, far less expensive for their ratepayers, and will provide many, many, many jobs for Colorado. So I want to leave you with those articles. And I wanted to say a couple things. On the one hand, I'm glad for the rooftop solar customers that the Public Service Commission denied Northwest Energy their requested rate increase for those ratepayers. However, I've been trying to take a deep dive into learning a lot more about how the Public Service Commission works and works with Northwest Energy. And what I'm learning is that the amount of revenue Northwest Energy actually receives from solar ratepayers is a very small fraction of Northwest Energy's income. I'm now understanding that the rate case was sort of a drama that Northwest Energy and the Public Service Commission engaged in an effort to distract ratepayers from the profoundly more serious plans Northwest Energy has. Essentially, the Public Service Commission can now point to their decision and make the public think that you're on our side. In the meantime, Northwest Energy is utilizing a proprietary model to determine what energy production means will provide the so-called lowest reasonable cost over the next 20 years. It's notable that all those plans make Northwest Energy and their shareholders the most money, happen to be the energy sources their own model recommends as the least cost. I strongly recommend that the state invest in having their own transparent modeling.
Yes.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Northwest Energy wants to build 800 megawatts of new fracked gas plants by 2025 with no new wind or solar. Northwest Energy also wants to keep Colstrip 4 open for another 20 years. These will become stranded assets and cost Montana's billions of dollars, as you've been hearing. I also learned that Northwest Energy and the Public Service Commission collude to exploit a loophole in our laws. What happens is that Northwest Energy, on purpose, leaves out projects or resources out of the procurement plan, and then at a later time comes to the Public Service Commission and requests the commission approve these so-called opportunity resources, such as might be buying Colstrip 4, or for the pipelines that they will need to move gas to their proposed gas-fired plants. The commission can then approve these opportunity resources without any public involvement. These projects wind up costing ratepayers millions and possibly billions of dollars in rate increases, only to further line Northwest Energy's shareholder pockets. I had a procedural question. I know that our comments are being transcribed. Is there a process by which these are analyzed? Does the Public Service Commission have a process in place where our comments are analyzed and actually taken into consideration in your decision making, or are our comments just kind of going into thin air and for naught?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I'm happy to attempt to answer that. We have transcribed this proceeding, like I mentioned. It is being audio and video recorded and will be put on our website. Staff will be reviewing all the comments and putting together a memo for the Commissioners in the upcoming months after we complete this comment process over the next month or so and make recommendations to the Commission on what type of comments to provide to Northwestern Energy. So that's the process that we'll anticipate moving forward.
Do you actually have like a procedure in place to actually analyze the comments, like put them into categories and that sort of thing? I'm just curious. A lot of agencies do.
Staff will be working through that process. Obviously, we're receiving a great deal of comments. I think as you heard earlier on some of the prior procurement plans from Northwestern and the other utilities, we have not received a great deal of comments. So I'm sure staff will be looking forward to how to best analyze and go through that process, and we'll be as transparent as we can through that process and through this as we take public comment.
Thank you. My concluding message today is that the ratepayers of Montana are becoming more informed. We're angry, and we're watching you. We need you to do your job. Perhaps we'll have to resort to more lawsuits, and that's why I'm submitting my comments today, so they can be discoverable should we need to go down that path. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for making this opportunity for this public to speak to you. My name is Tim Holmes. I'm a artist from Helena and a solar energy producer. And I've got a lot of concerns about the procurement report. I'm just going to talk about one of them today. And that has to do with the fact that in looking at a big engineering project like this, it's pretty easy for us to look at the costs and ignore the values. And I want to bring up in particular a statement that appears on page 11-13 of the report, which says that Northwestern Energy doesn't take into account the social costs in responding to concerns about climate change. And I find this really alarming. If you go on a ship and you see a lifeboat there, that represents a social cost. If you own a building that burns down and you spend money trying to get people out of the building, that represents a social cost. And oftentimes, those are the most important things that are presented to us. Now, I'm not worried about our generation, yours and mine. I'm worried about our kids and our grandkids. And I think, what would it be if they look back at our period in history some decades down the road and discover that we didn't do everything we could to produce for them an environment that is at least as survivable as what we inherited from our forebears? If we're not able to do that, then I say, what kinds of creatures have we become? And I'm not directing this at the Commission or at Northwestern Energy. I'm directing this at our generation. Or as the Bible said more beautifully, what profit does it give you if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? So I appreciate your considering this proposal. Thank you.
I'm Fran Penneray from Helena, Montana, and I want to thank the Commission for accepting all these public comments, of which there's been financial advisors, petroleum engineers, and thoughtful, concerned people. And I believe that the resource plan presented by Northwest Energy used their automatic resource selection model And it is a flawed model because it really doesn't do the cost and benefit analysis for the true costs of the pipelines, the cleanup costs, the environmental degradation, the resource costs. And in that resource model, it came to the conclusion that's quoted on page 11 of the executive summary that says, renewable resources and energy storage tech are projected to decline in cost, but are still more expensive than natural gas-fired resources and were not selected by the model. There are flaws in that model, and I think they were focused on utility-scale solar and wind, and it's probably appropriate for wind, but I believe there could be more acknowledgement of the contribution of rooftop solar towards meeting our energy needs for reliable energy in the future.
Hi, my name's Melissa Blessing, and I'm from Belgrade, Montana. Good afternoon. I'm here to exercise my right to public involvement and stakeholder input. First, I'd like to comment that your public involvement is less than accessible and accommodating. The last PSC meeting I attended was in a tiny title company office where we had to cycle through from outside in the cold weather, the building, to speak to you, Mr. Koopman. The same is true today, although I'm quite sure you knew there'd be this large turnout. There's been enough press. I thank you for rejecting the rate increase, as was your only choice, given Northwest Energy's refusal to provide thorough justification. As regards this hearing, it is only prudent and exigent that Northwest Energy engage competitive resource bids, rigorously evaluate market changes and risk, which, by the way, in no uncertain terms, describes investors abandoning coal and fossil fuels around the globe, and expand stakeholder, not just stockholder, input, which Northwest Energy has instead avoided with intent. Our legislature in 1999 and Senate Bill 409 stated that renewables must be a part of Northwest Energy's procurement strategy and investment. You have seen little, if any, growth in renewables during your tenure, have not publicly called for adherence to the bill's intent, and therefore are derelict in your duty to Montanans. We do not have the cheapest, most efficient, clean, and sustainable energy, nor are we likely to, as the need for this hearing proves. I remind you of your obligation to your employers, gentlemen. Send the procurement plan back to Northwestern Energy with clear and unequivocal instructions. We want renewable energy, investment, and we want it immediately, transparently, and responsibly in that order. From now on, we will hold you accountable determinedly, and we will vote.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Gail Joslin, and my family goes back many generations in Montana, and we're not likely to ever leave this awesome landscape. And we will continue to forever be involved in our energy future. First, thank you for voting on net metering as you did. I want to be able to be part of the energy solution in the future by generating rooftop solar, and I want to be able to do this because I had to move last year and haven't had an opportunity to get involved yet, so you gave us a small window here. So please stay the course that you have taken with that vote and encourage Montana households to join in providing energy to the grid at a reasonable, even incentivized rate. You, as our public representatives and stewards of our future, must require honesty from Northwest Energy in any plan. You must demand full disclosure of costs of that plan, demand comparisons with other energy companies with respect to modeling projections into the future, recognize that the public wants and demands that we quickly transition to renewable energy. For being the nation's fourth largest state, it is far past time to harness the big skies, wind, and solar energy because renewable energy is the treasure state's greatest treasure. Fairness and equity on behalf of Montana citizens now and tomorrow is in your hands. Reject the Northwest Energy Plan and rate increases, and please do the right thing. Thank you.
I am going to interject here briefly. Since we have been going for an hour and a half, we need to take a 15-minute break here. The court reporter cannot go nonstop for the entire length of this proceeding, and so we will reconvene at 3:20.
So close. I'll make sure to get
Okay, folks, if you can find your seats again, we will reconvene here.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, nice. That's awesome.
That's great.
And before we move on to our next public commenter, I want to recognize Mr. Kraske for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Just for planning of everyone here, we plan to go until about 4:40, take a short break, and then restart over again with presentation and comments starting at 5, and then hopefully we can get through everyone throughout the evening. But I would encourage people as they line up, if you have to leave town or you're getting on a bus, please work with people in line to get up front so you can get your comments heard. And if you have availability because you live in Helena or have some flexibility, we can accommodate you as we go through the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kraske. All right, next up, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Linda Young, and I'm Professor Emerita of Political Science at Montana State University. And given the comprehensive comments that have been made and many excellent discussions already offered up, I'm going to speak very briefly from my heart. My last few years of teaching were marked by the fact that our students are really having a crisis of depression and anxiety about their future. What they're reacting to is overall is a sense of diminished opportunity for meaningful work, an unparalleled level of income inequality in our country, and by decision makers of all types who prioritize shareholder profits over public health. They're reacting to the fact that we have capitalism that's not really free market, but it's oligarchy at this point. Young people, and I think most of your audience here believe the thousands of scientists who say that we have 11, 12 years to reduce emissions by 50%. And this is absolutely revolutionary. This reduction, I think, should be your mandate, right? We should be leaders in this. It is revolutionary, but models of leadership abound all around us. We can see leaders. We can look to models of indigenous communities. We can look to Pope Francis, who offered up for people of faith a revolutionary model of thinking, of culture change in Laudato Si. And I think that it's not too much to ask that of you today in all of the decisions that you make to consider this mandate, reductions of 50% at least of emissions over the next 12 years. Our young people deserve nothing less.
Will Commissioner Koopman be coming back anytime soon? He's my commissioner, so I don't know.
Yes, we expect him back.
Okay. I guess
First, I'd like to call your attention to the youth in the room, and then I'd like you all to raise your hand if you have a final this morning or if you have one tomorrow from university or your high school. I want to assure you that we don't want to be here. We want to be figuring out how to pay our student loans, studying for our final, paying our rent, which is exorbitant in many places in Montana, and doing the other things that young adults should be doing. With that in mind, I have a few different comments I'd like to make on the presentation that we saw previously. First, I think it's never a good thing to compare the way we as a utility, or Northwestern as a utility, react or is in with its CO2 standing in comparison with other utilities. It's basically saying we're slightly better than those people that aren't doing a very good job either. Yes. And to me, that's not a good thing. Also, Ben mentioned that natural gas may be the cheapest way to reduce carbon, and also the cheapest option going forward. And I'm wondering if he is taking into account all variables. First, I asked him outside, and he says that it is uncertain if the plan is taking into account methane, which is way more potent than CO2. Also, is it taking into account our air and the right we have to clean air and water as Montanans? I have asthma, and I pay $500 a month for the inhaler that I need to breathe. A friend of mine has a 5-year-old that wakes up on smoky mornings from wildfires and says, "Mom, it's gas or it's mask weather." That is a cost on human life, and it's a cost to me that is being put on me by Northwestern when they use coal and gas resources. As Montanans, we have rights to clean air and water, and now is the time to do exactly what is necessary and not what is practical or financially doable. It's my future, and climate change aside, pollution is pollution. I want a vibrant future like all of you have had the luxury to have, and I want that for all of the people behind me and all of my classmates that have come forward today. We don't want to be here. We want to be doing young adult things and not worrying about our future at stake or our home being polluted. Please, ask Northwestern Energy to redo their entire plan and take into account all variables, and that this one is not satisfactory for Montanans.
First, I wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Amy Cush, and I'm from Bozeman, Montana, and I'm part of the Sunrise Movement, and I just have a few things to say. We need to make a change to clean renewable energy and find a way to make it work. There's just no way around it. Being a student in the Ecology of Fish and Wildlife Department, I can tell you for a fact that if we don't make a change, the entire ecosystems are at stake, and that will have a direct effect on humans' availability to survive. Your constituents are counting on you to protect us from the dangers of continuing to use carbon and all other dirty forms of energy, and that includes natural gas. Please think of future generations, and please take care of our Earth.
Hello, my name is Nick Hostetler. I am also from Bozeman, and I am also with the Sunrise Movement. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to start with a point that was made at the beginning of the presentation we were given. There was a small point, but the point was that when Northwestern Energy runs its simulations, that no preference is given to different forms of energy production. Right? The logic behind this is that Northwestern Energy's only obligation is to its shareholders, to make money. Right? That's flawed logic, right? We, the people in this room, the people on the board, the Northwestern people, everybody, we are some of the richest people in the history of the planet, right? And we have far more moral obligations than just to make sure that we're making money. We have moral obligations to ensure that the way that we, as the richest people in the world, behave, we have obligations to consider how that impacts the world's poorest people. And right now, we are, quite frankly, screwing them over. Right? Predictions are that by 2050, there will be 150 million climate refugees on this planet because where they live now will be inundated at high tide due to rising seas. We are looking at, in the coming decades, widespread crop failure and drought. Soybean crop in the United States down 15% this year, as is corn, due to unprecedented flooding in the Midwest. I would also, my next point is I'd like to talk about some of the intergenerational dynamics that have come up a little bit. I guess I would like to tell you and all of the other older people in this room that that my generation, the young people in this room and the young people in this country, we will transition this society into carbon neutral. That's not a we want to, that's not a we're going to try. I'm telling you we're going to do it. And that's a promise, and given the presentation we were given, it's also a bit of a threat, I guess, because I am here to tell you that every single piece of infrastructure that you build to harvest natural gas, every pipeline, every fracking rig will become a stranded asset. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Molly, and I also go to MSU. There are only a few things that I'd like to say because I feel like everybody in this room has said a lot of the most important things. But the first one that I'd like to address is the focus that Northwestern put on the cost of the procurement plan. And I would just like to say that I think the cost of not changing the plan and including renewables in that plan is much greater than not taking any action at all. The second thing I'd like to address is that cost and jobs are the most common rhetorical tool used by fossil fuel companies to convince people that we need them and that we need them in order to have energy that's consistent, which another focus was put on. But I think that we need to look through that rhetoric and see beneath it to what it really is, and that they have monetary investments in Colstrip and in those places that make it more beneficial for them and less beneficial for Montanans to continue using fossil fuels over renewables. The second thing that I would like to talk about is the cost on our future generations that not moving to renewables poses. I think that I personally want to have children, and I think a lot of my peers want to have children, and I think a lot of you sitting up there and almost most of the people in this room probably have somebody our age that they care about or grandchildren that they care about and that they want a safe and secure future for. And without moving to renewables, it is impossible to secure that future because you are automatically placing them at a disadvantage that none of you saw, because the climate crisis is here and the number of people in this room is proof that we care about it and that our generations care about it and that we're going to continue speaking up until change is made.
Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Hines, and I do thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak before you. I am speaking because I have been working on renewable energy projects for over 15 years, and sometimes with rural communities, sometimes in poor countries. But the message is, it works, it's cheap, and it gets the job done. Unfortunately, if we listen to the news that's coming out of Madrid at the climate change conference, the news is not good. The Secretary General said we've got two options. We can surrender, or we can take a path of action and hope and work together. We need to work together. It involves all of us. And he said very clearly, it's private sector, it's communities, it's the youth, but it's the old people too. It's everyone needs to be able to help plan and develop concrete solutions for the future. It was also very clear, we've passed the 400 million limit. We're probably going to pass the limit on temperature increase. So what are we going to do? Are we going to keep mining coal, burning coal? That's an option, but it doesn't leave us with much hope, does it? We can start moving to renewables, which is happening in many places. And it's happening at different scales, and that's one of the points I want to bring out. It's happening, sure, rooftop solar. It's happening with farmers and ranchers. It's happening through cooperatives. It doesn't have to always be through one big company. And so We need to be creative, we need to be innovative, and we need to involve all people. But I have a concern, and I think it's one that hasn't been mentioned, and that is a source of revenue for Montana comes from the coal severance tax. We're not planning how we're going to generate income when coal is no longer a major source of energy for the state. So I ask you, please start considering how we're going to continue to fund the social programs, the environmental programs, the development that this state needs if we don't have a coal severance tax. My other concern is really the transparency around renewable energy. Various figures come out on what it really costs to generate energy from solar and wind. Is it 20, 25, perhaps it's 30, compared to 78, 80 from coal and gas? So I don't understand exactly how those models come out with the sort of figures that they do. So I think we need to come back and say we need information that is representative of economic costs, financial costs, social costs. We need a just assessment with correct information and information that represents all sectors of the financial system and the economy of the state. Finally, we all want to be involved. I think we all have ideas, we all have solutions. So I thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak before you. But now is the moment to say this plan needs to understand what are the repercussions for this state going into the future, and to listen to the public and to come up with solutions that are just for all. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners, for being here today. My name is Greg Findley. I'm from Bozeman as well. I'm a business owner. I have an MBA. I'm also a parent. I skipped work today, like many of these people, and came up from Bozeman because this is important. Today was also a very important school event for my 10-year-old son, and I had to skip that too because his future is more important than this one day, and his future is being decided here now. So I've read a lot of the resource procurement plan. I say a lot because it was written to make our eyes glaze over and make us unable to understand what it's talking about. But I did notice a number of things. First of all, we already heard today it's based on assumptions. And the assumptions that they based it on are very clear that they are the assumptions that make Northwestern Energy the most money, not what is best for the ratepayers or the environment that supports our agriculture, tourism, and outdoor recreation industries. The plan has a basic overall assumption, and that assumption is wrong. They say the assumption is that the greatest threat facing Montanans is a lack of peak energy. That's incorrect. The greatest threat facing Montanans is a changing climate. If the plan were to start with that assumption, all of the assumptions underlying that would spit out very different results from all of those models that they ran. We were asked why we were shaking our heads earlier. No, I haven't done advanced analysis, but I have read analysis from those who have. And what they say is that wind, solar, and batteries, a combination of the three, can meet all of our energy needs at much lower cost than new fracked gas plants. New fracked gas plants will become stranded assets within a decade, replaced by this cheaper energy from wind, solar, and batteries. But we'll be paying for that for decades, or we'll keep operating them when our energy costs are too high while we continue to emit more greenhouse gases than necessary. Northwestern ignores a number of things in their assumptions. One of them that they ignore is that one of the best ways to meet our energy needs is through energy conservation. If we pursued strong energy conservation, we wouldn't need to build so much new infrastructure and so much new power. Many of the assumptions are so wrong that they're dishonest. They based the potential of wind in Montana on the existing wind plants that we have here. Montana has the second most wind potential of any state in the nation, and yet we're only utilizing 1/10 of 1% of that wind potential. So they said in the wintertime, on the coldest day, that the wind didn't blow that day. They based that assumption on the 1%, or the 1/10 of 1% of wind potential in the state. And they extrapolate out that the wind didn't blow anywhere else in the state. That is dishonest. Study after study in other states and around the nation says that we can meet our needs with wind, solar, and batteries combined. Another thing that Northwestern did was they modeled wind, and they modeled solar, and they modeled batteries, all separately. They never combined them. Combining them is the solution to the problem, because if the wind's not blowing, the sun's probably shining. They went on to say in their plan that some of our needs went unmet because it was a sunny day during high pressure and the wind didn't blow. Well, guess what works on a sunny day? Solar. And what could have met the needs? Batteries. It's the combination of the three that solve our problem. They didn't model that, and they even state, oh, we didn't bother to look at that one. That is the one that would have solved our problems. Northwestern started with the outcome that they wanted, which was new fracked gas plants. They created assumptions and fed those into the models, and guess what they got? New fracked gas plants are the best for the state of Montana, and it's all completely wrong. Thank you.
Who in here would like a little transparency around Northwest Energy's proprietary model?
Yeah. Commissioners, thank you for your time, for offering this public comment, public listening session. I'm really sad that Bob's not here. He is my commissioner, and I've met with him before. He's a very nice man. I am here on behalf of my 5.5-year-old daughter. In 10 years, if we don't change course, the worst impacts of the climate crisis will begin to hit, and she will only be 15. As you may know, we have a constitutional right to a clean environment in Montana. As elected officials, you must have some responsibility to uphold our state constitution. The research presented so thoughtfully today by Ben is helpful and obviously offered in earnest. I know Ben, and I like him as well. There is no doubt that the market is changing. And I'm so encouraged. It's such a comprehensive report, and there are so many graphs and so much science. And I am so encouraged to learn that this commission has an interest in scientific research. If you consider Northwestern Energy's research in your cost analysis and your comments on this plan, you must consider the research and consensus of more than 15,000 scientists around the world that say we are in an ecological and climate emergency. If you consider Northwestern's research in your cost analysis and your comments on this plan, you must read the full IPCC reports released over the last year on 1.5 degrees warming of the planet and what that will mean for humanity. You must read the report on our oceans and our cryosphere. You must read the report on land and agriculture. Don't worry. I will submit them to you with my written comments. If you consider Northwestern's research in your cost analysis and your comments on their plan, you must read and consider the 2017 and soon to be released, I believe, 2019 or 20 Montana Climate Assessment, and understand that Montana is warming more rapidly than what is predicted globally. Montana is a hotspot in the climate crisis. Our farmers and ranchers know it. Our fishing guides know it. Families across the state know it. Montana should be leading in combating this crisis. We have a lot to lose. We have a beautiful state. We can't solve the global climate crisis alone, just Montana, but we can do our part. And gentlemen, that is called leadership. Montana has 26% more solar resource than the average in the country. We are on par with Germany, who leads in solar energy production. We are ranked, I thought it was just the top 5, apparently we're number 2 for wind power. Montana should lead, we can lead, and as you know, we will lead.
Koopman, you can't just write every time people talk about science. Listen. It's a listening session. Please listen. Don't write on your piece of paper every time people talk about science.
Sir, I'm not the chairman, but you are out of order. I'm taking voluminous notes that I can review later. If you don't like that, I'm sorry. Can't do anything about it.
Hello, Elliot Thompson, Missoula, and I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to comment. It's great that you have these public commenting periods, especially that there are 2, with the second and only other one being today. I want to thank you for the great lengths you go for accessibility. I would first, I echo everything that, I like to echo everything that's been said already. I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. One thing that I would like to challenge is Ben's assertion that we are in a capacity crisis. Northwestern Energy has the means to address this crisis, and when you have the power to address a crisis and you believe you're in a crisis, you do everything you can to alleviate that crisis. Well, the easiest way to address peak demand is to do energy conservation, energy efficiency. And utilities have the ability to do that. Northwestern Energy has the ability to do that. Rural electric co-ops around the country do that through things like tariffed on-bill financing, where they help people pay for retrofitting, and they can do that. If we're in a crisis, I don't know why Northwestern Energy doesn't have any plans for addressing on a large-scale energy efficiency. I'm sure you could cut Bob Rowe's, salary in half and do a whole lot with that. So I think it's just a false assertion that we're in a capacity crisis, because we have plenty we could be doing about it that doesn't require building more plants and investing more and trying to build our way out of this problem. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jennifer Swearingen. I live in Bozeman. I would like to just briefly address one of the most serious problems I see in the plan, aside from the fact that it largely ignores renewable energy, and that is that it insists that in order to meet peak demand, that is the highest demand on the highest day of energy draw, that it must own 100% of that generation, and that only natural gas is reliable enough to do that. They have said that they are not engaging in fear-mongering, but they have raised the specter of blackouts. I think it's really important to remember that in the first decade of Northwestern's existence, they owned 0 generation, nothing. And the lights did not go out. No one froze to death. And we got along pretty well. I just think this is an absurd assumption. If the commission grants permission to build 800 megawatts of new gas generation, that would mean more than tripling Northwestern Energy's reliance on fossil fuels. And this would be occurring at a time that we all agree that we absolutely have to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. That, to me, is just unthinkable. It also presents an enormous risk to ratepayers, as many have pointed out. These plants have a lifespan of 20 to 40 years, and those plants are going to become stranded assets. In sum, I strongly urge you to scrutinize the assumptions that Northwestern Energy has made in this plan and ask them to go back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm glad you've returned. Oh, my name is
Patricia Beck. I live here in Helena. And first, I want to say that I agree with Commissioner Koopman's recent suggestion that the investigation be opened to deal with the myriad issues involving the coal-fired plant at Colstrip. Northwestern Energy has not been forthcoming and honest about the potentialities and the liabilities of Colstrip, which, as you well know, is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the United States. At the last legislative session, Northwestern attempted an end run to avoid commission oversight, as Northwestern sought to take on a larger ownership share of the Colstrip plant. What was the utility trying to accomplish with this move? Did Northwestern wish to keep the public in the dark regarding the real costs and the real liabilities to the customers? Northwestern tells us in this plan that it intends to run Colstrip for at least another 20 years. What happens when the partner utilities stop buying this high-cost power? What about the $20 million boiler repair recently identified? What's the cost to customers for the eventual shutdown? How about the costs of cleaning up this mess? If the Commission were to open a new rate case focusing exclusively on Colstrip, as Commissioner Koopman suggests, might the Commission take another look at the stranded costs? Might the Commission re-examine the false evaluation of Northwestern's 30% share of Colstrip 4? Wasn't that inflated cost based upon market value? We now know there's absolutely no market to resell this outdated plant. So now what? While other for-profit power producers and regulated monopolies in the Northwest are ready to be done with coal-fired energy, Northwestern Energy wants more. Idaho Power, PG&E, Avista, and Pacificor are all planning for a carbon-free future. Indeed, we need a carbon-free future. All other utilities in the region have committed to going 100% renewable by date certain. All will completely abandon Colstrip within the next 5 to 10 years. How is it that these other state-protected utilities in our region are moving forward with diversified clean energy portfolios while our Northwestern Energy offers absolutely no analysis of the future role for wind and solar in this 20-year plan? This is unforgivable. The stark reality is that continued consumption of fossil fuels is self-destructive. Northwestern wants to build 4 new gas-fired plants at a cost of $200 million each. I don't want to pay for 4 new gas plants. I don't want a single one of them. Northwestern has ignored opportunities. Northwestern has ignored opportunities for pump storage of renewable energy, such as the Gordon Butte project. Instead, the utility has built the Anaconda Peak plant that burns fracked gas and diesel. The Dave Gates plant is a major investment that I don't want to have to pay for. But pay for it I will, because we're all in this together. What the Commission decides, the public will necessarily pay for. I find Northwestern's resource procurement plan to be entirely off the mark and inadequate and you've heard many, many reasons here today. The fossil fuel development outlined in the plan stands contrary to public interest. I urge the Commission to declare the plan deficient. Please refuse to allow Northwestern Energy to justify a poorly conceived energy future on the basis of this plan. Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to submit handouts. Okay, thanks. I'd like to submit handouts for reference to the commissioners as I speak, please. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Ita Killeen from Bozeman, Montana. And first, I want to begin by voicing my appreciation for all that the Public Service Commission and Northwestern Energy have done over the years to keep the lights on and provide energy to Montana homes and businesses. I've traveled to Helena today to express concern that the Northwestern Energy Resource Procurement Plan and its cost models are skewed towards business as usual, focusing on fossil fuel energy sources. There's a clear and growing movement in America today for clean, renewable energy, and I believe you can see it in this room today. Pew Research polls show that 92% of Americans across the political spectrum favor expanding solar power, and 85% of Americans support increasing wind power. In Montana, county-specific opinion data that's shown in your handout shows that 50 to 72% of Montanans favor actual fossil fuel taxes, with an average of 66% support statewide for this. Consumers increasingly want clean, renewable energy, and neighboring states like Washington, Oregon, Nevada, even Wyoming and Idaho are planning for this. They're moving away from using carbon-based fuels. Currently, there are 7 bills in the U.S. Congress specifically calling for a carbon fee or tax. Most of these are associated with dividends to households or cuts in payroll taxes to try to offset costs to consumers, and the bills are outlined on page 3 of your handout. These proposed carbon fees during the first year, range from $15 to $50 per ton of CO2 emissions, and they increase steadily to an extrapolated $50 to $150 per ton of CO2 emissions by 2030. In contrast, the projected cost of carbon pricing in Northwestern Energy's procurement plan's high carbon price scenario is only $18 per ton of CO2 emissions by 2030. A carbon tax in the range of what is being proposed on a national level would make carbon-based fuels much more expensive and completely upend the cost analysis of the Northwestern Energy procurement plan. If Northwestern Energy continues with its current flawed cost models that ignore the increasing market demand for clean renewable energy and the shifting landscape of carbon pricing, then there's a very strong chance that Montana ratepayers will be left with having to pay for gas-fueled power plants as stranded assets. I've heard of the predicament of ratepayers who are caught up in the enormous costs of the coal debt that was taken on by Tri-State, and I don't want that to happen to Montanans. With the cost modeling of this procurement plan, there's a very real possibility that the Northwestern Energy will incur debt for its ratepayers for new gas-fired fuel plants that will then be stranded assets in years to come. And meanwhile, we'll be caught without readiness to utilize cheaper, cleaner sources of energy. I ask commissioners to help ensure a future of affordable, reliable energy for Montanans. Please demand that as a monopoly, Northwestern Energy take a responsible approach for preparing to utilize Montanans' clean, renewable energy sources, and ask them to show a more accurate cost modeling that includes the costs of potential carbon taxes consistent with the currently proposed legislation. I'd also like to ask that the plan be remedied so that cost modeling should reflect a more realistic timeline for coal strip retirement and cleanup, the cost of infrastructure for any new carbon-based assets, and cost modeling of more realistic scenarios where wind and solar are integrated with storage technologies rather than in separate scenarios. Thanks for your time.
My name is Valenanthos. I'm a young Montanan from Missoula, and I want to thank the Commission for holding this hearing session today. As many others have said, I think this plan is based on models that do not account for the full scope of costs and issues that we will face in the next 20 years, and I don't think that the current procurement plan accurately reflects what is best for the future of Montana. I find it interesting in the presentation that there was so much emphasis on this kind of tired trope of the wind only blows sometimes, the sun only blows sometimes, as if there aren't solutions to this, as if countries like Denmark haven't been running on mostly renewables for the past couple of years and have not had a problem keeping the lights on and keeping the heat on, having a very similar climate here to Montana. There are so many things we can do, such as demand-side management, energy efficiency, reducing demand in electricity, which is a proposal that does not seem to be on the table at all. And I know several others have questioned why we aren't looking more into energy efficiency, even though it is the most cost-effective and easiest way to reduce demand. And that is simply, I think, because it is not good for a profit margin. The more energy we produce and the more people consume, the more profits that are generated, even if this ends up contributing to climate change or costing ratepayers more. And it is the commission, it is your job to do what is best for the public, not what is best for the profits of one company. I think many communities are tired of being held captive and forced to pay for projects they do not want. And we recently just had the ratepayer case that was targeting rooftop solar and really limiting people's ability to put more solar on their rooftop and produce their own energy, as this is a threat to profit and control on Northwestern Energy's part. And if they are so concerned about blackout rates, you think they would be encouraging rooftop solar like crazy, because that is one of the best ways to ensure that we don't have a blackout. Decentralized energy is an amazing, amazing thing that really protects against the threat of a blackout, but it puts power back in the hands of the people, and that is not what they want. But I hope it is what you want. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, Commissioners. My name is Mark Anderlich. I'm from Missoula, and I've been 18 years a union leader, and 13 of which spent with the head of the Missoula Area Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO. I want to just hit on a couple of points. There's been some very excellent points. I will not repeat them. But I will call your attention to the Wall Street Journal, September 29th of this year. There's an article written called "Shale Boom is Slowing Just When the World Needs Oil Most," is the title of the article. And in it quotes essentially system-wide all the fracking that is going on mostly in the east, but also in the Bakken, is significantly slowing down. In fact, they say in that article that this year the production is down 12%, and that's on top of last year production down 16%. If you recall, the whole fracking industry has taken on huge amount of debt to get going, to get started, under President Obama, as a matter of fact. And they have yet to pay back a lot of that debt. If as an industry, their production is going down, where are they going to have the wherewithal to pay off their debts? They have yet to turn a profit. And to depend upon, I know there's other sources of natural gas. There's quite a few wells in Montana that are currently capped, but depending upon the fracking industry to power this interim gas power is a pretty dicey business with a industry that has yet to show a profit. Second part is that the conservation, this gentleman before me had spoken very eloquently about conservation and efficiency. That obviously is hugely efficient in terms of money and foregoing the need of additional power production. And that has not been emphasized in this report. I would say, just to conclude, that the PSC should not consider any proposed infrastructure projects that come out of this plan. I know you can't reject the plan out of hand, but until there's more transparency and more numbers that have been shown that this is exactly the way to go, it remains very dubious at this point, I would say. Otherwise, if the PSC does not take that up and address climate change in a very serious and systematic way, I would say that I would advocate for public ownership of Northwestern Energy and of the dams that we gave up. Thank you very much.
Chairman Johnson and commissioners, I have been thinking in my mind, and I'm not an economist, but I've thought, should a public utility be for profit? I had that question before Mark brought it up. I'm Claudia Brown from Missoula, and I've worked on global warming since 1998. And that was back when the global parts per million was around 350, and now it's 410 and going up. And all Earth systems are breaking down. This is proven. There's all kinds of science behind this. Please understand what the scientists are saying. It's a catastrophe. Water and the oceans, the air, the soil, habitat, microbiota, insects, animals are all breaking down and going extinct. And people who live on the coasts are in danger. The fate of our children is in danger. Fossil fuel burning causes global warming. We must learn to use less energy, and we must rely more on renewable energy. It's necessary. It's necessary for survival in the future. I thank you for your decision on net metering, because I have 7 solar panels, and aside from the $5 about service fee, I only pay for electricity in January, February, and March. And I'm very willing to be a little less comfortable just to save on gas. I also really support solar energy and ask you to please support solar energy in terms of what you present to Northwest Energy. And I'm also urging you to reject Northwest Energy's procurement plan. Thank you.
My name is Beth Taylor Wilson, and I'm from Missoula. During the climate strike in Missoula on September 20th, 350 Montana captured on film Northwestern Energy's cowardly response to some polite middle school-aged kids who respectfully asked a security person if they could talk to someone inside the Northwestern Energy Public Utilities building about climate catastrophe. Instead, this security person called the Missoula Police Department. These very polite policemen sent a squad car, and 2 very bemused policemen showed up. They left about a minute later, no doubt wondering what kind of threat could non-aggressive, articulate 12-year-olds possibly present to a privately owned public utilities building. What is Northwestern Energy afraid of? After writing an October newspaper column denying climate change and opposing children's choice to strike for the climate and for their futures, Roger Koopman, Commissioner, you wrote another guest column on November 4th that you told us that you just wanted to have some fun. And you question, quote, the scientific validity of the world coming to an end narrative, unquote. Mr. Koopman, this topic is not fun. It's existential. That's why I told all the commissioners the last time I was here that your children and grandchildren will not be proud of you. It's worse than that, sir. Your children may not even be here. I implore you, please do your jobs. Protect the public and protect your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. No new fossil fuel infrastructure, period. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chairman Johnson, you represent my district. Thank you. My name is Diana Hammer. I'm a mom, hope someday to be a grandma, and I'm a ratepayer. And I'm here today. I took off work, time off work today because I feel so strongly about this issue, as so many other people did. And I thank you for your patience. It's been a long day, and I know you've got more ahead of you. But I feel so strongly that this resource plan, looking 20 years into the future with nothing in there about renewables, is so short-sighted. It's completely inadequate. I ask you to please send Northwestern back to the drawing table. Ask them to resubmit something that is fitting for the 21st century, not the 19th century. We can do so much better. The technology is there. The science is there. We know what to do. We have the resources. We have the wind. We have the solar. We're more and more, we're having the storage capacity. We don't, as many people have mentioned, we don't need to be investing in outdated fossil fuel technology. Building new plants is ridiculous. And as many have said, those will be stranded assets in the future. Someone earlier mentioned there's a recent poll put out by the Pew Research Foundation, released just before Thanksgiving, and Americans, 92% do support renewables. More and more Americans oppose investment in fossil fuels. Montana should be leading, and this regressive resource plan put out by Northwestern is unacceptable to anyone who is thinking about the future, who cares about their kids and their grandkids. So I do want to thank you for two recent decisions. The rooftop solar was a great decision. Thank you so much. And I was excited to see in the paper about the terms that you set for the new wind farm in southern Montana. That's awesome. So thank you. But this is the direction we should be heading, investing in renewables, not in fossil fuels. That is absolutely the wrong direction to be going. So I urge you again to send Northwestern the clear message, redo this plan, make it acceptable, make it 21st century, use the current science, and include assumptions that incorporate the uncertainty with climate change. We know it's happening. We live in a changing climate. And one other thing I want to mention. So the Department of Defense calls climate change a threat multiplier. Northwestern Energy's infrastructure and our beautiful state are at risk from the impacts of climate change, so we need to act. We don't have time. So there are three things. We need to reduce consumption. So a lot of people have mentioned energy efficiency. We need to work on that. We need to electrify everything, and we need to green the grid. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Brad Stacy. I'm coming from Plains, Montana. And I come here because I'm really terrified what's happening with our world. My daughter, who is recently married, is having discussions with her husband whether it's responsible to have kids now because of global warming. I believe part of your commission is to look at not only the price of electricity, but the safety of it. And with what we've heard today, with what 97 point something, the scientists say that greenhouse gases are not safe. It simply is not safe. And to put more greenhouse gases does not make sense at this point. When they said the wind was not as cheap as natural gas, I wonder why the other states around us say that it is and are putting it in, and would like to say that Rick Perry, who is a global warming denier, when he was governor of the oil state of Texas, put in a number of wind farms because it was cheaper. And the last thing I'd like to say is they made a comment, Northwest Energy made a comment that we might be having blackouts if we don't build these gas plants. One, I don't believe that. I believe the green energies can handle the load that we have. Number two, if that is the only way we can operate with saving our planet, I would rather have the blackouts. Thank you.
I'd love to send some of these around, if that's possible. My name's Matt. I'm from Bozeman. I'm a student at Montana State University. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences over the past semester working with Forward Montana Foundation. I'm going to start with talking about the climate strike that Sunrise Movement put on. So Tosh is an 8-year-old child living in Bozeman, and on a cold, wet afternoon in September in torrential rain, Tosh wrote a note to their representatives about the negative effects that the climate crisis could have on themselves, the environment, and their community. And Tosh kept it short. He wrote, "I won't get to grow up." I've spent a significant amount of time this semester collecting climate stories like that as part of an internship working with Forward Montana Foundation. We're an organization focused on elevating the youth voice in our state. Our goal is to collect about 1,500 of those stories from youth in Bozeman, Missoula, Billings, and other communities across our state. And aside from the occasional climate denier or maybe a student who's late for class, a large proportion of the people we ask are eager to share their views and engage in discussion. While tabling at the co-op in Bozeman, I spoke with an auto mechanic who was passionate about embracing a Green New Deal, which we hear a lot of. But he was also interested in tighter regulation of car tailpipe emissions and things like that. And that's really interesting, and a lot of people care a lot about cleaner air. But one theme is consistent across all responses. Young Montanans are concerned about our planet's future and feel real urgency to act. Andrea, a 24-year-old from Bozeman, wrote, "Montana is a headwaters state, and I can't bear to think about declining runoff in our rivers and streams. The impacts for our two major economic drivers, agriculture and recreation, would be devastating. Because Montana is better equipped to handle changing climate patterns, we'll see even more people moving here, something I've watched Bozeman struggle to plan for already. We've always preached energy independence. The time to act on it is now." And Jake, a 34-year-old from Billings, wrote, "I love to fish, and anyone who knows fishing knows that the water temperature plays a big part on the health of the fish. Too warm and the fish can't thrive, spawn, and other things. If climate change isn't reversed, then one of Montana's biggest tourist industries is going to suffer. In order to prevent our issues from worsening, we need to invest in renewable energy, especially wind and solar. We've seen little action from Northwestern Energy to change, despite support across the state for renewables. Young people know where to point fingers. We need representatives that will demand our utility companies listen." Olivia, a 20-year-old from Billings, wrote, "I am frustrated that big corporations are ignoring the climate problem, and they are the ones who are responsible, not plastic drinking straws." And according to the Commission's website, in big bold letters across the top, the goal is to ensure that energy in our state is affordable, reliable, and sustainable. Yet Northwest Energy has among the highest rates of the major private and public utilities in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, Washington, and western South Dakota. In the midst of multiple rate increases over the past few years, Northwestern's profits have doubled. It's imperative that our representatives demand action on climate change and that Public Service Commission returns to representing the people. We need to push for investment in wind and solar opportunities, which will bring about affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy in the region, while keeping our air clean and our snowpack healthy. If the Commission won't bring the change we desperately need and engage the electorate will, and in 2020, we're gonna come out to vote. But the hundreds of climate pledges make one thing clear. Youth will turn out to vote for climate. As Noel, a 22-year-old from Missoula, writes, "I value our world, our beautiful natural surroundings, our future. Climate change is something that affects all of us. We have no option but to address it and do everything in our power to change our climate politics to address this emergency." And thank you for your time. I'm going to go study so that maybe one day I can sit in one of those chairs and do the right thing. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Matt Treaster. I'm also a student, actually, in electrical engineering at Montana Tech in the master's degree program. I want to thank you for listening to everybody today and the public comment. I know this has been a long afternoon and it's been, one-sided and people kind of come at you, but I was just kind of thinking part of the problem is trust between the public and Northwestern and the Public Service Commission. And I just want to say the decision that you made on net metering, I think built a lot of trust with the community. I was talking with the solar installers that are going to have literally presents for their kids on Christmas. So Dr. Fleischman left, but I just wanted to talk about the advanced. I'll keep this short. I know you've sat here for a long time, but the Power Sim program that they use costs a lot of money. None of us can just, if we don't have a license, we can't just go out and use that program. I'm sure it's like $1,000 a month or something. But just, looking around the region, you look at Xcel Energy, you look at Pacificorn, you look at Idaho Power. Xcel Energy made a commitment to 100% renewable energy. Idaho Power also has made a commitment to 100% renewable energy. And Pacificorn, in their resource plan, is not planning on building any new fossil fuel and just renewable energy. Northwestern is headed into the energy imbalance market, which will eventually be a large, regional transmission operator, hopefully, where we can move power around the grid. But my fundamental point is, with the most honest inputs into this model and the most real rigorous analysis, there may be actually, like Dr. Fleischman was saying, some role for natural gas that can even lower climate emissions. You probably haven't heard this, much today, but it's true. But I think that's the problem, is the public's not trusting Northwestern to do the most rigorous analysis. Vibrant Clean Energy is another one. Consulting firm that's in Bozeman, they mentioned their name. And if they modeled it, I'm sure they would, I've read the reports, they might actually come out with some natural gas. So from my perspective, in Minnesota Republic, I just want to see the most open, honest analysis that we can come up with. Now, I'm talking from an economic perspective. We've heard a lot about climate today. You take that into account, that's obviously going to tip the scales against it. Also considering emissions from fracking gas, emitting methane and flaring. But set those aside, I would just like to say a real rigorous, honest, open analysis is what I'd like to see as a member of the public. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, members of the commission. My name is Ben Brower. I'm the section supervisor of the Energy Planning and Renewable Energy section at the Energy Bureau of the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you for the invitation to provide public comments this afternoon on Northwestern's 2019 supply plan. DEQ's Energy Office regularly participates in state, regional, and national forums regarding energy issues, including supply planning. We're also an active participant in Northwestern's Electricity Technical Advisory Committee, or ETAC. DEQ right now is in the process of completing written comments on the 2019 plan. We anticipate submitting them to the commission prior to your January 3rd deadline. And given that our comments have not yet been finalized, I'll just provide a very brief overview today. In summary, DEQ is encouraged by aspects of the 2019 plan, including Northwestern's engagement with regional resource adequacy planning efforts, their plan to enter the Western energy imbalance market, and their planned rollout of advanced metering infrastructure. Our comments will also suggest a closer analysis of certain elements in the plan, including the potential impacts of regional market development on Northwestern's resource needs, the potential for demand response and energy efficiency resources to meet demand needs, and potential costs and risks related to new gas generation and existing thermal generation resources. DEQ looks forward to staying involved in this important supply planning effort and will provide additional detail in our written comments. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mary Lakshmi von Hoffman. I'm from Missoula. And most of what I have to say has already been said, so I won't repeat that. I'll just let you know that when President Trump took us out of the Paris Climate Accord, I called up a solar power company in Missoula and put panels on my rooftop because I thought that was the most positive thing I could do to respond to that very wrong decision, in my opinion. And then the other thing that most recently happened was I was in Burns, Oregon, looking for a motel room, and pretty much all of the motels in that little bitty town were all filled. And turned out the reason why is because there were a lot of crews there putting up solar array panels all over the place. And if Oregon can do it and all these other states can do it, Montana can do it. Thank you.
Well, it's good evening.
Not good afternoon anymore, commissioners. My name is Representative Mary Ann Dunwell. I represent Montana House District 84, which is Helena and East Helena. And Chair Johnson, you are my PSC commissioner, so thank you for your service. Thank you for all of your service. And through, there you go, right? So, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat a lot of the good things that folks said today. I do have them on my official office letterhead, and I'd like to submit them, please. Thank you. Good afternoon stretch there. So, thank you for the opportunity to comment about Northwestern's Energy Electricity Supply Resource Procurement Plan, docket number 2019.08.052, hike. So, first off, folks mentioned transparency. You probably all have a copy and you've read this procurement resource plan. You know, I consider myself a smart person. It, I think, was written to just obfuscate public engagement and transparency. You know, I'm a legislator. I'm also, my day job was public information officer for like 20 years and a journalist for 20 years before that. This should be written in plain language. It's gobbledygook, elitist, non-transparent jargon. And frankly, it disenfranchises the very customers that Northwestern should include and engage. You know, as a state legislator and ratepayer, I'm concerned about the climate crisis. So I'm against this plan. And more fracked gas plants and increased carbon pollution will negatively affect present and future generations of Montanans to come. And that's just not okay. As a legislative member of the Consumer Committee, looking out for the public interest of ratepayers, this plan, frankly, financially benefits Northwestern shareholders, but its hardworking ratepayers, not so much. The plan should emphasize renewables and pumped hydro storage and battery storage. The plan should consider coal strip decommissioning and environmental cleanup costs. It should consider the externalities of our societal cost of fossil fuel industries versus renewables. The increase in asthma, we heard somebody today talk about that, and other illnesses that Montana's experienced from contamination of our land, water, and air, and the economic factors that we're seeing from changing agriculture, tourism, you name it. I mean, climate change is even a threat to homeland security, for goodness sakes. But these things need to be included. There's a cost. There's a cost to all of this. Energy markets, job prospects. We heard earlier the transition, the cost of a just transition. Well, you know, let's make sure that those hardworking Montanans who work in our coal mines and our fossil fuel industries, that they keep their pensions. We know there's going to be transferable employment out there that's sustainable for their families and future, their families' families. We heard include conservation. We need regional energy reciprocation and strategies to share load and resources with the Western U.S. outside of Northwestern Energy's region. And, you know, I'm going to end with how I started. Needs to be more transparent. Northwestern needs to be more transparent to its ratepayers. You know, or frankly, it's running the risk of, we heard today a couple people say this needs to be a publicly owned utility, which frankly I agree with. So, you know, I'll carry the legislation if anybody wants to bring it. as I mentioned, the resource plan needs to be written so folks can understand it and engage and not be disenfranchised. The other thing, the meeting, the advisory committee meeting that pulled together really good folks from many walks of life, that is closed to the public. And I don't understand how Northwestern can do that. And you can okay that. This affects the public and ratepayers. If it wasn't for the ratepayers, Northwestern wouldn't exist. So, again, thank you for sitting through a long day. I know you've got another one this evening, a long evening ahead. But I don't like this plan, and I hope you echo my sentiments to Northwestern. Thank you.
My name is Claudia Narcisco, and I'm from Missoula, Montana. And thank you for the opportunity to comment. I did not read the plan. I cannot tell a lie. And I figured, well, I might as well say something. I've came all the way from Missoula. When I bought my house in Missoula, when I relocated here with the Forest Service in 2003, soon afterwards I got an energy audit from Northwestern Energy, and over the course of years I whittled away at a long list of things that I needed to do to make my home more energy efficient. Everything from a new furnace to new windows, it was a lot of money over the course of time, and I was happy to pay it because I saw some real benefits to it. Initially, I went on budget pay, so it's been really easy to monitor. Initially, my budget pay was $126 to $131 a month, and at some point, it went down to $74 a month after I did all of these retrofits as suggested by Northwestern Energy, my energy audit. So when I retired and considered installing solar panels, I was getting a good deal just by energy conservation, like several people suggested here. But I felt it was my social responsibility to do this for the future. And so I made the investment. And I would like you to know that the providers came with estimates and told me I should have 12 panels in order to cover all of my energy needs. But I couldn't afford it, so I put what I could afford. And that's why earlier this year, when you had the net metering opportunity to comment, I did go and comment, and I basically said, this is going to affect me personally. And during the course of time waiting for your decision, which finally came, and I was glad to hear that I could extend and improve my system without penalty. But those were very stressful months to me. And as a retired person, aging, I didn't need that extra stress. But I had made an investment that I didn't need to make above what I could really afford. But now I'm comfortable that I could increase the capacity of my solar panels due to your decision. And I do want to thank you for that. Okay?
All right, I see no one else in line. Is there anyone who still in this session wishes to offer public comment? If not, I want to thank all of you for... Come ahead, please.
Anything that hasn't been said, but since I came all this way, I'm going to just read what I have to say. My name's Mary Dixon. I'm here out of concern for the future of my children, and I know you've heard that numerous times, but I'm going to say it again. And the quality of the life we are so fortunate to enjoy in Montana. I've lived here my whole life of 61 years, and I've been a nurse for 37, and I am a mom. And my faith impels me to speak out against the continued promotion and reliance on fossil fuels. With all the science and knowledge we now have, I see it as an act of violence and extreme disregard to our land, water, air, and each other. And I just impel you to, as members of the Public Service Commission, to do just that, to serve the public,
to think about your calling to this commission. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Brian Barr, and I came from Missoula also. And I don't have anything in detail more to say that what's already been said, but I did take a day off of work of supporting my family so that I could be here and support the efforts of calling Northwestern into account for planning for our future. And I appreciate you guys conveying that to them and doing that on behalf of us. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Going once, going twice, sold. I want to, again, thank you all for being here. This is a vitally important part of our system of government. We truly do appreciate the public taking the time to be here and sharing their views with us. A reminder that the comment period is in fact now held open until the 3rd of January, close of business. If you want to submit any further comments, you have until then to do so. Again, sign-up sheets in the back if you want to be on the list that will get you notified on a regular basis of proceedings coming before the commission, as well as a brochure back there that can help walk you through how the commission can assist you in your relationship with us and gathering that information. With that, we will adjourn this proceeding, and we will reconvene at 5 o'clock for round 2. Thank you all very much for coming. We don't need no. Welcome all. This listening session for the Northwestern Energy's 2019 Sorry, Lisa. Started without the court reporter. That's not a good idea. Now, this listening session for the Northwestern Energy's 2019 Electricity Supply Resource Procurement Plan is now in session. I am Commission Chair Brad Johnson, also the Commissioner representing PSC District 5, which includes Helena, Montana. For the record, we're starting at 5 p.m. on the 9th of December 2019, and we are in the Bollinger Room of the offices of the Montana Public Service Commission in Helena, Montana. Any of you that have not yet signed in on the list outside the door would encourage you to do that. That will put you on a list to receive notifications of pending business to come before the commission, so that you'll have a better handle on what it is we're doing when, and can be more involved when you are so inclined to do so. On August the 20th, 2019, Northwestern Energy filed its 2019 Electricity Supply Resource Procurement Plan with the Commission pursuant to Montana Code Annotated 69-8-419 through 420 and Montana Administrative Rule 38.5.8201 through 8229. I want to point out that the Commission has extended the period for public comment to January 3rd, 2020. We will accept comments with regard to the plan up until the close of business at 5 o'clock on that day. After receiving those public comments, the Commission will in fact analyze and consider the plan, and it will issue subsequent written comments with regard to the plan. I now want to recognize Chief Legal Counsel Justin Kraske to talk about the statutory role of the Commission in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, members of the public. Under 69-8-420, the public utility shall develop electricity supply resource procurement plans. The plans must be submitted to the Commission at intervals determined in rules adopted by the Commission. An electricity supply resource procurement plan must demonstrate the public utility's achievement of the objectives provided in 69-8-419 and compliance with Commission rules. The Commission shall review the electricity supply resource plan, provide an opportunity to the public to comment on the plan, in accordance with these provisions. The listening session today is for the purpose of the commission listening to public comment. Both commissioners and staff will not be answering questions. Also, the commission shall issue written comments within 9 months after the plan is submitted to the commission that identifies any concerns of the commission regarding the public utilities compliance with commission rules and ways to remedy any concerns. The commission does not approve the plan, only comment. The commission shall hold at least 2 public meetings in an area of the state encompassed by the plan. We held a meeting earlier today, starting at 1:30 through about 4:40. We've scheduled several listening sessions across the state, first in Missoula on December 17th in the evening at the Missoula Library, next in Billings on January 2nd at 6 p.m. at the Billings Public Library Community Room, and then also in Lewistown on January 3rd at 5 p.m. at the Lewistown Public Library.
Thank you, Mr. Kraske. At this point now, I want to invite representatives from Northwestern Energy to provide a brief summary of the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll refer commenters to the presentation we gave earlier today and let you proceed right now with public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. We'll then move on to, and I should back up the presentation from earlier today. Will, and Drew, I'm not how, will tomorrow or the next day we'll have that posted?
Yes.
Tomorrow or?
Sometime in the next 24 hours.
Sometime in the next 24 hours, we will post on the website the presentation that was presented earlier by Northwestern Energy with regard to the plan. So that will be available. I think many of you are aware of at least the fundamental elements of the plan, and so we will move at this point to public comment. So any of you who wish to come forward, give us your name, where you're from, and share your thoughts with us. Please. That old white button in the,
That one?
the blue light come on?
It did.
All right, you're ready to go.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I wrote out just a brief summary of my comments for the commissioners. So, can I give them to you? You can hand them out. You can look at them, take notes, draw pictures. I don't know. I know you guys have had a long day because I was here at 1:30 and I couldn't even make it in the room, nor could I see or hear anybody, so I came back at 5. But I do live here in Helena. And thank you so much for the opportunity to comment. My name is Ruth Swinson. I live here in Helena, and I've lived and worked in Helena over 40 years. I'm actually submitting my comments as a representative of the little old lady ratepayer contingent. First of all, I would really like to express my gratitude to the over 1,200 Northwestern Energy employees in Montana that provide safe, reliable energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. They're awesome. They do a great job. They go out at 20 below weather to repair down power lines. They write really helpful comments in my monthly bill about being careful about electricity or ways that I can save power or insulate my house. So I just wanted to start, I'm just starting off thanking our Northwest Energy employees from Montana, our 1,200 plus. When I was looking at the report, one of the things that I just do on a personal level is I always like to go, what's the motivation of people? Why, how did this report get out there? And what are the thinkings of the people that wrote it, and why did they write it? Honestly, I haven't talked to them, so I don't know. But some of the things that I found out when I was doing a little bit of research, to me, shed a little bit of light on it. The first one is, of course, Northwest Energy is a monopoly. Their corporate headquarters is in South Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, yet 80% of its revenue is from Montana. Only 2 of the 10 board members of Northwest Energy list their residences in Montana, and one of them is in Big Sky. The CEO's salary as of 2017 was $2.6 million. In 2018, he took $1 million stock option. Comes out at $3.6 million. That's kind of a big number. And so I started to divide it out. Like, that's $300,000 a month. It's over $69,000 a week. It's over $13,000 a day. And it's over $1,700 an hour, which is more than I make a month to live on. Also, Northwest Energy owns coal resources that provide 22% of their Montana electric supply, and they own hydro resources that provide 42% of the electricity. One other little fact that I came across doesn't really have to do with Northwest Energy so much, but it's a little bit of a perspective about a lot of low energy income people in the state of Montana. There's a program, you guys have probably heard of it, LEAP, a Low Income Energy Assistant Program. They have 17 sites in the state of Montana, and they have over 20,000 people that they work with in the winter. I know you've heard comments about the plan, and so I'm not going to go over those, about Colstrip and about the people who also invest in Colstrip are pulling out earlier than 2042, and Northwest Energy wants to stay a little longer, and there's no solar and wind and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. I know you've heard all that. So I'm going to just skip to the conclusion. Hawaii, California, Washington, Maine, New York, New Mexico, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico have all pledged to produce 100% of their electricity from renewable energy sources. Also, 150 cities across the United States have also taken that pledge. 28% of the United States population resides in one of these cities or in one of these states. To coin a phrase from baseball, I think it's time for Montana to step up to the plate and make a serious commitment to renewables. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Others wishing to offer public comment at this time, please step forward. Mr. Fady, welcome.
Good evening now, Commissioners. My name is Brian Fady, last name spelled F-A-D-I-E. I'm the Clean Energy Program Director at the Montana Environmental Information Center, and very much appreciate the public comment being taken today and the Commission making space for that and sitting here through hours and hours of testimony. We very much appreciate it, and we appreciate adding the additional comment hearings as well in the future. I do sit on the Energy and Technical Advisory Committee, the ETAC committee that is part of the creation process for this plan. And so I also appreciate all the work that Northwestern has put into it. But I do have some fundamental issues with the plan, and I want to point to just two big ideas. In particular, risk. I want to talk about risk and ratepayer risk. So we know that the plan is calling for these new gas plants, and Northwestern is in part saying that we should do these gas plants because then we can avoid the market price for electricity, and that market can be volatile, it can be risky, the price can spike, and that's bad for consumers. But at the same time, what I don't feel is being disclosed enough in the plan is that the company is proposing trading one type of risk for another. Namely that the gas plants, they require a fuel in order to operate. That fuel is subject to market forces as well. The cost of natural gas can go up, can go down. It can spike, and it has spiked in the past in this country. And if a utility is heavily invested in natural gas-fired generation units, that's a consumer risk, because consumers are going to have to pay that price if there's a spike in gas prices. To illustrate this, I would point to Northwestern's own filings in the past and take a look at the 2014 hydro dam purchase docket. When the company purchased the hydro dams, 2014, this was D 2013.12.85. And, at the time, the company was trying to purchase the dams and it wanted to make them look like a good asset. Well, one of the things that dams do, they don't have a fuel price. They just have water that's not subject to fuel price like coal or gas. And they pointed that out. The company pointed that out in the plan or in its application for approval. I'd point to testimony by Joe Steinmetz, who at the time was manager of asset optimization. And in their approval filing, he said, quote, "The addition of the hydros removes a significant amount of market risk to which customers are currently exposed. Other types of generators, particularly natural gas-fired plants, carry significant exposure to markets for fuel supply," end quote. That was his testimony there, trying to say, look, the dams are a great purchase in part because of this characteristic of it. And I would submit wind and solar energy have that same characteristic. They don't have a fuel cost. They're not exposed to this fuel market risk. Mr. Steinmetz also filed testimony in that docket saying, quote, "Other types of base load generation," he was contrasting it, dams versus other types of generation. He said, quote, "Other types of base load generation, such as natural gas-fired plants, have exposure to carbon regulation risk, as well as commodity market risk for their fuel supply," just further backing up that this not being exposed to the fuel price risk is a desirable attribute, and we know that wind and solar have that attribute. That was 2014. Let's flash forward to closer to today. I think there's two big picture dynamics in the natural gas world that we should all be aware of. In recent history, natural gas prices have been relatively low, mostly due to fracking has increased the supply and caused the price to go down. Something else has changed in the U.S. We previously had a ban on liquefied natural gas exports from the U.S. to anywhere else. It was a federal ban. That has been lifted, and the United States is now exporting liquefied natural gas to other countries. That is going to put a pressure on the supply side of natural gas. Will that cause prices to go up, go down, spike? We're not sure, but it's certainly a risk, and it's a dynamic that wasn't there before. We're also seeing other utilities around the country, around the West. They're also considering doing gas plants. If all of them build all of these gas plants, that is going to put, again, a supply-side pressure on the market. Is it going to cause prices to go up, go down, spike? We're not sure, but that's a risk that ratepayers would be exposed to. I would also submit that low gas prices due to the fracking boom, and this is just very recently, that it's starting to show signs that that may not be continuing, that the fracking industry is facing some new financial pressures. In large part, the fracking companies, they've been getting a lot of investor cash over the last 10, 15 years or so with the promise of, well, we think prices will eventually be at this point. I'm a fracking company. I'm saying I'm going to produce this amount. Prices will be this amount. You multiply those two. That's what we think our revenue is going to be in the future. And the more people are digging into it, it seems like those companies may have been underestimating what the cost of gas would actually be in the future. Basically, prices have been lower than what they thought they were going to be. And if you're a company and you're reliant on higher prices to bring in the revenue necessary to pay off your investor loans, it's starting to seem like that hasn't come true, and investors are pulling back. And there are Wall Street investment firms that are now saying, we are not going to put any more cash into fracking companies because their promises of what gas prices were going to be haven't panned out. They've just remained too low. So something is going to have to break here. Either the price of gas will have to go up, or some of these companies are going to have to exit the market, thereby reducing supply and causing the prices to go up until the industry can sustain itself. And this is very new, and I should say MEIC will be filing extensive written comments with all of this, but I just want to bring it up as a general dynamic. Finally, you heard earlier about natural gas pipeline costs being left out of the plan. This is a big deal as part of this. This is a cost that we know that Northwestern will have to incur if it wants to build all of the gas plants in the plan. Again, I would point to the company's own filings. 2013, the resource plan made the following statement, page 5-23, quote, "The natural gas pipelines that serve Northwestern's service territory are near full capacity. Installation of significant new natural gas-fired generation anywhere in the Northwestern service territory will likely require pipeline capacity upgrades or interruptible pipeline service with diesel fuel backup," end quote. That was the 2013 plan, and it's worth noting that that clear and concise statement of the issue with the pipelines has been removed in the succeeding two plans, and it's not in this one. So with gas plants, ratepayers would seem to face a lot of risk. The second point I want to make, renewable energy facilities, they just don't create this risk for ratepayers. There's no fuel risk. Wind and solar, energy efficiency, they protect consumers from this risk. And again, I would point to Northwestern's own previous filings to back this up. The Spion Cop wind facility, it's a 40 megawatt wind facility. Northwestern owns it. It had to get approval from this commission to put it into rates, and it had to file dockets, right, documents to back that up. I would point to, that was docket 2011.5.41. A gentleman, Todd Goldseth, who was the energy supply planner at the time, testified about wind projects possessing characteristics that shield them from several long-term risks. And he listed two, and then he listed a third. He said, quote, "Third is volatility in fuel markets, such as natural gas and coal. Because wind facilities do not consume any fuel, wind projects are immune to this volatility," end quote. That's what the company has testified in previous dockets. You heard as well earlier, the cost of renewable energy, they are still falling. Very briefly, every year the financial analysis firm Lazard puts out a document with a national average of the costs of different power plant types. The latest one, the 2019 one, came out recently. Long story short, utility scale solar declining 13% annually, wind down 7%, and these have been for just years that these costs have been declining, and the projections are that wind and solar will continue to decline in costs. Finally, you also heard earlier that other utilities in our region are voluntarily doing more renewable energy, and they're doing it because it's good for their customers. These are companies that are not being forced to do this by state law. They're doing it because it's a good economic choice for their customers. Idaho Power, earlier this year, signed a contract for 120 megawatts of solar. The price was $21.75 a megawatt hour. That is super cheap energy. And there was no state law that forced that to happen. That was the company doing its own due diligence. It found a project. It made sense. They signed that contract. PacifiCorp, it's a very large company. It serves multiple states, millions of customers. It also produces one of these resource plans. In its most recent version, it found that retiring coal plants and replacing them with renewable energy, as well as other energy sources, would save their customers at least $500 million. Now, PacifiCorp is a much larger company than Northwestern, but the basic dynamic that if you conduct this analysis and see, do our current power plants actually make economic sense anymore, which this plan did not do, we think you would find that wind, solar, energy efficiency, battery storage, these other options can save consumers money. Finally, very briefly on the battery storage part, this technology is changing very quickly, and the same cost declines that wind and solar saw over the last 10 years are now happening in the battery storage world. And this commission is quite familiar with that with the Beaver Creek projects. 10 years ago, who would have thought? 5 years ago, who would have thought? A wind plus battery storage. And now there's a project before you. I would just point to the size of these projects around the country and how quickly they're becoming very large. So in 2017, the largest battery in the world for lithium ion was 100 megawatts. Since then, you've had projects with signed contracts for NV Energy, the largest utility in Nevada, 135 megawatts battery storage. Next Era signed a 200 megawatt battery facility for the Western Farmers Electric Cooperative. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has a contract for a 300 megawatt lithium-ion battery project. And then Florida Power and Light, 409 megawatts with an online date of 2021. The point is that the technology is just changing very quickly, and it's getting a lot better, a lot quicker. In this plan, I know Northwestern modeled, I believe it was 25 megawatts was the size of their battery project. And obviously the market is just blowing by that already. So MEIC certainly looks forward to submitting further written comments. We thank you for your patience and listening to everybody throughout the day. And we look forward to submitting more information later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fady. Other public commenters? Good evening.
Yes, good evening. Chairman Johnson, members of the commission. My name is Robert Filipovich. It's Filipovich. These last 30 years I've lived in Helena, about a mile that way. To state the obvious, I listened to all afternoon's testimony. We've got to find ways to work together. We have to recognize our biases. Both of those things are extremely difficult to do. And as you probably know from experience better than I do, it's very hard to predict the future. There's an old joke about that, isn't there? And the data, as the adjunct professor suggested this afternoon, is simply what has happened, not necessarily what will continue to happen, makes even the use of data difficult. I guess this is a way of saying, in a sense, I don't envy the decision that you have to make here, the difficulty of it. But we have to work with the facts. I think we should try to work from what is already working demonstrably. And then once we have all the facts out on the table, to try to debate their implications. By way of starting, I should say that I am aware of at least a couple of my biases. I'm very concerned that the entire commission is made of Republican commissioners. You might guess from that I'm on the other side, so it's easier for me to see that than perhaps it is from your side. And I am a advocate of addressing global warming and the consequence we call climate change directly. So at least those biases, which I suppose will be obvious to you, are going to be manifested in what I say here. Looking at the executive summary, page 1.1, there are 19 years between March of 19, when the extreme weather hit, and the year 2000, when prices spiked, according to the bottom of page 1.1. So we have a 19-year span here to try to predict, in this case, if we were back in the year 2000, excuse me, what was likely to happen, how frequently, and how much it would cost us. That's pretty tough. And Northwestern says at the very bottom of 1.1, Northwestern is concerned events like this may become more frequent. That sounds to me like climate change, the events becoming more frequent. And then it goes on the top of page 1.2, and so Northwestern is taking steps to mitigate current wholesale market exposure. That, for me, is, in a nutshell, we're going to build more plants so we can anticipate, pretty much anything that we come up against as a corporation, as a monopoly. Continuing, quoting here again, continuing to assume the market will always be able to provide customers with sufficient electricity at affordable prices is a reckless approach that could have severe reliability and cost consequences. Always be able to provide customers is an, et cetera, is an impossibility, it seems to me. Always is an impossibility. And the term sufficient electricity is apparently not synonymous with the term that we find in the MCA and the administrative rules of Montana. Sufficient is not synonymous with adequate, and if I get a chance, I'll explore that a little bit. Now, we've heard some studies, and we read about them in the plan about organizations that have made predictions and so forth. I would like to offer one of these to you. This comes from Nature Communications 2019. It was published in January of 2019, which contrasts with the E3 study that's footnoted in the early pages of the summary. This comes before. And the headline is, Compound Climate Events Transform Electrical Power Shortfall Risk in the Pacific Northwest. It's 38 pages. The abstract is quite short, but I know that you can read, so in the interest of time, I'll just reference the article. Let's get it in the record. All I copied was the abstract, the initial. And I strongly recommend that your staff and experts read it. Now, what is Northwest Energy supposed to do then, according to the law? And consequently, then, what are you supposed to, as I see it, what are you, the PSC, supposed to do to make sure that they do follow the law and the rules? Well, we can go, of course, to Appendix A of the first 300 pages. And I'd recommend going to MCA 69-8-419, Section 2A, which reads, provide adequate and reliable energy supply service at the lowest long-term total cost. That's a pretty stiff requirement. Adequate, I've inferred from research, is as I said, not synonymous with sufficient. I think adequate must have some legal definition, and I'm not actually sure at all what that term means. But it turned up in the titles of an awful lot of articles that you can find pretty readily searching around as I did in the last couple of days. So provide adequate and reliable. Well, reliable. Does that mean 100% reliable? I think that's the direction that Northwest Energy wants to go, because they want to build more supply reserve, and that would obviously move us in the direction of reliable, 100% reliable energy supply. However, we don't build ambulances with x-ray machines in them and ambulances that go 200 miles an hour, because if we did, we could probably save a few more lives, but it would be at considerable expense and some other difficulties with it. And so I question this notion of reliability, particularly when it moves in the direction of attempting to claim or seek for 100% reliability. And then, of course, there's always the problem of long-term total cost. Okay. I'll tell you what, I think 2B is obvious enough to you. That's 69-8419 2B. Simply evaluates the full range, I would underline full range, of cost-effective electricity supply. Then, looking at the now I'm stumbling. What is it? It's the it's not the MCA. It's the ARM. 38.58202. I would just want you to look at the definitions. Definition 5, quote, environmentally responsible, which means explicitly recognizing and incorporating into portfolio planning. And definition 6, external costs. You heard about externalities and external costs, but there it is in ARM. And that's, as I understand it, those are the rules that you have to see that Northwest Energy follows. Just in passing, I'd like to mention another way that you might look, or your experts might look, at the study. If you, since the study on Northwest Energy's site is a PDF document, you can just do Control F, you get a box, and you can search for words or phrases. I did that to find a reference to 100% renewable energy that you'll find in the text of the summary, for example, but it's very useful to search for terms. For instance, the word green power doesn't occur at all. The word green occurs 6 times, but it's always in reference to green lines in charts. So we could be, you can use it to search, you can use it to debate the implications of the facts. I think the Control F is quite useful. And just in closing, and I know there's much more that needs to be referenced here, on page 1-13 of the volume 1, right at the very top there, excuse me, meeting our customers' future needs by adding carbon-free resources is projected to cost $523 million. I'm sure you've read that. $523 million more than meeting their needs using natural gas-fired resources. You heard begging all this afternoon about transparency. We need the accounting there to see how that was actually calculated and how that first sentence in this paragraph fits or doesn't fit with the second sentence in the same paragraph. I'll leave that up to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Come ahead, please.
Thank you for enduring and sticking through the day. I am Denny Haywood, Haywood from East Helena. I hold an undergraduate degree in zoology and an MBA from Arizona State University. I am retired with half of my career as a wildlife biologist and research program manager with Arizona Game and Fish, and the other half of my career working with both public and private sector organizations in Arizona and Montana to measure and improve organizational performance. I'm concerned about the health of both our natural systems and our economy, which are both deeply interrelated. This evening, I would like to make one point. Power production business management today must be a balance of at least 4 performance metrics: reliability, revenue, economic cost, and environmental cost. The conflict being debated here is how best to optimize all 4 parameters. Many members of the public advocate use of renewable energy to minimize greenhouse gas production while minimizing economic cost and also ensuring reliability. Northwest Energy advocates ensuring reliability while maximizing revenue. The fundamental argument made within the resource plan against the use of more renewable energy sources than proposed is that there are periods of peak demand when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. The resource plan cites a March 2019 study by E3 stating, and quote, moving to a 100% carbon-free portfolio was not modeled, but a recent regional analysis indicates that it would be cost prohibitive. The implication presented throughout the resource plan is that because periodic demand requires gas-fired generation capacity and 100% carbon-free portfolio is cost prohibitive, that in this all-or-nothing scenario, gas-fired generation is the only alternative. However, this is not the conclusion of the E3 study cited by the resource plan. The Northwest region-wide study projects that costs increase exponentially as power generation systems move from 90 to 100%. The costs just go up dramatically. But that deep carbonization can be achieved at moderate additional cost at the 90% level. The E3 report goes on to say that simultaneously modeling a combination of wind, solar, storage, hydro, and gas-fired generation for limited peak demand periods only can result in 80% greenhouse gas reduction below 1990 levels, equivalent to 90% greenhouse gas-free power generation, while meeting load demand. Reading from the E3 analysis, quote, assuming an existing average retail rate of 10 cents per kilowatt hour, this implies an increase of 3% to 14% in real terms relative to the reference scenario. Because the 80% reduction scenario achieves 100% clean portfolio standard, this scenario is compelling both from a policy perspective and a cost perspective in balancing multiple objectives across the greater Northwest region, unquote. A major strategy for balancing reliability, revenue, economic cost, and environmental cost is to pursue diversity of renewable power generation sources simultaneously over a large and diverse geographic area, while utilizing gas-fired generation to sparingly fill the gaps until technology develops to decarbonize further. Less gas-fired peak generation capacity than projected by the resource plan may be required under this scenario. For example, a June 2019 study by the Clean Energy Transition Institute suggests that as little as 4% of the annual energy needs in the Northwest region could be supplied by gas-fired generation while achieving a deep decarbonization. I asked the Commission first to require Northwestern Energy to follow E3's lead and model a simultaneous combination of wind, solar, hydro, storage, and limited gas-fired peak generation with the goal of 90% greenhouse gas-free power generation. Second, I urge the Commission to identify and adopt a balanced scorecard of standard quantitative metrics and historic data with which to objectively analyze and communicate to the public progress towards achieving a balance of reliability, revenue, economic cost, and environmental cost. Unless we all agree on the metrics and targets, or at least define them, then developing a common understanding and purpose will be impossible. I thank you for your time.
Welcome.
Marianne Shoemaker. I live in Helena, Schomaker. Just can't put all your eggs in one basket. Everything in natural gas just doesn't make any sense on so many levels. Even my stockbroker says, diversify. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public commenters? We want to make sure you have your opportunity. Doctor, yes.
I just wanted to say thank everyone for all the time. This has been a lot of complicated topics that we've all covered, and I really appreciate the Commission's time for listening to this. I know you get to do it again in your local districts, and I especially appreciate everyone who showed up to speak. So Northwestern just wants to thank everyone for their time and energy on this.
Thank you. So, one last opportunity. Any other public comment? Or yeah, come on back up. What'd you forget? All right, with that, I want to remind folks that the public comment period is open until the close of business, 5 p.m., January 3rd, 2020. So further comments are welcome and encouraged until that time. Again, sign up if you're interested for the notification list in the back so that you'll receive automatic notifications of dockets coming before the commission that might be of interest to you. There are also some brochures back there that help you navigate through the website in order to find other assistance. With that, I again want to thank all of you for your participation. We genuinely do appreciate it. And this listening session is adjourned. Thank you all very much.